just go through the membership. I'll do it alphabetically. Obviously, I'll start with myself first. Councillor Ian Wingfield, Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Labour member for St Giles Ward. I'll start with Councillor Ali next, please.
Hi, Councillor Hamera Ali, Liberal Democrat member for London Bridge and West Bermondsey.
Okay. I think Anud is next. Is that correct?
Hi, yeah, I'm covering for Victor this evening, Councillor Anud Al-Samurai at North Bermondsey and leader of the Liberal Democrat Council Group.
Good evening, you're most welcome. Peter?
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Peter Vivudu, Labour member for Rye Lane Ward and Chair of the Education and Business Scrutiny Commission.
Thank you. Helen?
Hi, Helen Dennis, Councillor for Chaucer Ward and member of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you. Gavin?
Thanks, Chair. So Gavin Edwards, Chair of the Housing Scrutiny Commission and Labour member for Nunhead and Queensroad.
Thank you. Alice?
Thanks, Alice MacDonald, Labour Councillor for Newington Ward.
Thank you. Jason?
Jason Otra here, Labour Councillor for St Giles Ward.
Thank you. Victoria?
Hi, Victoria Lisa here, Labour member for Goose Green Ward and Chair of the Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Commission.
Thank you. Jane?
Thank you, Chair. Jane Salmon, Liberal Democrat Councillor for Surrey Docks and Vice Chair of Overview and Scrutiny.
Thank you. Leanne?
Hi, thanks, Chair. So Leanne Werner, Councillor for South Bermondsey and Chair of the Environment Commission.
Thank you. And is Martin with us this evening? Did I see him? Martin Bracknell? Possibly not. Okay. Martin was here at our last meeting. It's just that we couldn't see or hear him, but he was in the ether somewhere. So I must make a note of that. And Lynette Murphy O'Dwyer. No, she's not with us. No. Okay. And I think we've got two cabinet members with us. Is Richard there?
Yes, Ian. So Councillor Richard Livingstone, Cabinet Member for the Environment, Transport and Climate Emergency and Labour Councillor for Old Kent Road Ward.
Thank you. And Rebecca, please.
Yeah, I'm here as well. Councillor Rebecca Lurie, I'm Deputy Leader of the Council and Cabinet Member for Culture, Leisure, Equalities and Communities, and I'm a Councillor in North Walworth.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to check that everybody's aware of all the paperwork. We've had quite a lot of paperwork thrown at us just recently. We have the minutes under item 4. We've got minutes of 3 meetings that we have to agree. We also have the 2 call-in papers. First one for the contract award for generalist legal advice services, and the second for delivering a climate strategy for Southwark. We also have the cabinet report, which we considered last week, which we'll be making recommendations on. The call-ins papers are under supplemental agenda number 1, and the cabinet report is on supplemental agenda number 2. And we also have some background information which has been circulated very kindly by Councillor Lurie in relation to that call-in item on supplemental agenda number 3, and Councillor Livingston circulated a paper today in relation to the call-in under his portfolio. So and
Chair, it was Chris Page that circulated it on my behalf. In case people.
I'm very sorry. I must get my protocol correct. And also Everton Roberts circulated a paper outlining the recommendations which have been submitted since our meeting last Thursday, when I requested that recommendations be submitted in advance of the meeting, and that paper has also been circulated. So members have all sight of all that. No issues or problems with all those papers. Everton.
Chair, Chair, I don't have, or I don't seem to be able to find the Councillor Livingston's paper. Could I just confirm who sent it? Did you say Chris Page?
It was forwarded on by myself, Councillor Babu.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Everybody happy with the documents? To read, at least, anyway, if nothing else. Okay, good. Right, in that case then, I'll move on with the order of business as outlined in the agenda. So the first item is apologies. Obviously, we've had apologies from Victor Chamberlain, and Anud is here to replace him. That's the only other apologies I've received this evening. Item 2, there's no other business which I deem urgent other than what I've already discussed this evening. Number 3, disclosure of interest and dispensations. I think Councillor Elisa, you've got something to raise?
I think at this section, I'm proposing that I withdraw from item the scrutiny calling for the community legal advice, because I'm still an active trustee of the Southwark Law Centre, and I feel that if I make any suggestions or comments today, later on it may be construed as bias or whatever. So I think it's important that I withdraw from that item. I will listen into the conversation and the debate, but I won't add any comments, and I won't vote on the calling for the contract award of generalistic community legal services.
Okay.
I thought that it's best I declare that at the beginning.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you for pointing that out. Is there anybody else that's got any declarations of interest they wish to declare at this stage? No, everybody okay? Good. Okay, so let's move on then to the minutes. Councillor Dennis has helpfully reminded me she was on maternity leave, so obviously she can't agree or vote on the minutes as such. But can I agree that well, let's go through them one by one. The 11th of November 2019. Can I agree those as a true record, please?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. The 27th of January this year, can I agree those as a true record, please?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yep, agreed.
And finally, for the 29th of January this year, can I agree those as a true record, please?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's move on without further ado to item 5, which is the scrutiny call-in contract award generalist legal advice services 2020 to 25. Now, what I intend to do is obviously call upon Jane or Anud sorry. Sorry?
Hamera.
Yes, how could I forget you? Sorry, my mind just went blank for a second. Yes, so to talk on that, I'll ask the cabinet member to give a response, and obviously throw it open to questions to members, and then I believe we might have some outside organisations that may wish to comment after they've heard the discussion. Can we, Everton, can we just confirm who's online for that, please?
If you could give me one moment, please, Chair, and I'll confirm. One moment, please.
Okay. All right, okay, that's no problem. So before I ask Jane or Humera or Anu to speak, I just wanted to point out a couple of things to you. On the paper itself, item 5, you'll see in paragraph 3, it states quite clearly that the decision which is being called in is the contract award for generalist external community legal advice services to Citizen Advice Southwark for an estimated annual sum of £600,000 over a period of up to 5 years, 3 years plus option to extend for 2 years from the 1st of May 2020 to the 31st of March 2025, making a total estimated contract sum of £3 million be approved. You will see that under paragraph 5, we will consider whether this decision is appropriate. And in item 6, we should be mindful of the grounds of call-in and the specific decisions the call-in relates when considering the decision, whether the decision is appropriate. In paragraph 7, the committee should also be mindful of the provisions contained in the council constitution, which enable interested parties to make representations to a decision maker ahead of a decision, and the onus of the decision maker to have regard for representations received when taking a decision. The committee should therefore, as far as practicable, not introduce new issues or rehearse points that have previously been made to the decision maker. Now, I'm reading that out because I want, not just for the members' benefit, obviously, but also for the wider public, so that everybody knows what a call-in procedure is, because I think we haven't done one of these for some time, certainly not since I've been chair for the last 12 months. And I just wanted everybody to be clear what the grounds were in relation to a call-in and how the discussion and debate will be confined to those grounds. I just wanted to call in Norman, if Norman's there. That's correct in what I've said, isn't it, Norman?
Can I ask a question?
Well, let me wait to see. I've asked the question of Norman. Let's see what his response is. If he's there, is he there, Everton?
I'm not sure, Chair, but what you have said is correct.
All right. Well, thank you. Right. So let me just finish what I was going to say before I open it up. You will see under
sorry, to be clear, Chair, it was just a question on that very specific statement that you just read out.
I just said I will take questions once I've finished. Okay, thank you. So item 8, it says there in the 4th paragraph, specifically, I consider that the cabinet member, as the decision maker, has failed to comply with their legal duties under the Equality Act 2010 to have due regard to advancing equality and limiting discrimination. And then over the page, they make reference at the top there that the assessment is now entirely out of date. If you look down at paragraph 10, you will see that the potential outcomes available are that we refer this back to the decision-making person or body, or we refer the matter to the council assembly, or we don't refer the matter back to the decision-making person or body, but undertake a subsequent scrutiny review. And then finally, we don't refer the matter back at all. So that's the process constitutionally, which was agreed by this council and the framework in which we have to operate and work this evening. So yes, Anud, I'll take your question now, please.
Thanks, Ian. Apologies, I'm struggling with the chat function, so I wasn't sure if you'd actually recognise that. I wanted to ask a question on this particular point.
Okay.
It is about those paragraphs that you read out, paragraphs 6 and 7, because I've been involved in many OSC call-ins over the years, and those paragraphs have never appeared in an OSC report before about a call-in, so they are new. And I just wondered where they had come from, because I did ask our office to have a look in the Constitution and we couldn't find them. So, I mean, I appreciate things have all been a bit last minute this week, but are they actually from the Constitution, and why was there a decision to include them in this report either way? And then I may have a follow-up depending on what the answer is.
Okay, Everton, please.
Yeah, I may answer that as the head of overview and scrutiny and the report author for the report. The reason why those paragraphs were added is, as you know, I'm new to the role. When I look back at the reports that had previously been submitted for scrutiny calling, there wasn't really much information contained in those reports to guide members on what their role as overview and scrutiny committee was in respect of calling. So in order to try and provide guidance and clarification to members on what their role was, without completely restricting what they may want to do in terms of what information they want to consider as part of the calling process, those paragraphs need to guide members as to what their actual role was. This is to take into account that there is actually a decision-making process which allows for representations to be received before decisions are taken. And that when a decision is called in, it is called in for a particular purpose, and it is those areas that the committee should be focusing on, because that's the part that was considered not quite correct with the decision taken. What is there to do also is to not give members the impression that they can open up the actual issue for wide discussion, because that would in effect be rehearing an issue which is actually not for the committee to do. That's a decision for cabinet. So those paragraphs were added there to guide members without completely.
But added from where? They're not in the Constitution as the chair just suggested.
They're
written by you.
They're written by me, but based on conversations I've had with the Director of Law and the Head of Legal in terms of how we can reflect and guide members. The Constitution is silent about how members should go about the scrutiny calling process, but it's clear that the intention of it is to look at what was wrong with a particular issue. A report may cover quite a large area. If you call in the report for a particular issue, then that's what you should be focusing on. If you introduce new areas, you're then getting into a situation where you're considering issues which was not there available.
I mean, I get, if I can just come back on this, and then there's a wide point I want to make, but just to be really clear, you're trying to guide members, but I think it was misleading in the report because it did look like that language had come from the Constitution and it didn't. I completely appreciate your new Everton, and one of the concerns I raised when scrutiny was moved into Democratic and Legal Services is it lost some independence, because effectively it is not sitting separately from the people who are responsible for the decision-making process. And I think this is a clear example, I'm afraid, of where the legal services are trying to shape how members of this scrutiny committee decide to scrutinise, and you're giving us advice that actually doesn't come directly from the Constitution. So I just, for all members, whatever party, I think it is really important that we decide how to scrutinise an item and actually what is relevant to the decision, because as I say, I've been involved in many callings over the years. Sometimes you do go off on a tangent and it's completely up to the chair to think whether that's in context or not, but actually often you unpick some really serious issues about process and decision making that are the whole point of scrutiny. So I would just urge members to note that paragraphs 6 and 7 are not in the Constitution, and as much as I respect the officers for trying to support us, actually it's members of this committee who decide what decisions we want to scrutinise. And there is actually, I can send it to you, there is actually some information in the legislation which further strengthens the role of scrutiny, and I'm disappointed that officers hadn't flagged that to us. And then the wider point, Ian, is just because this is a call in about the generalist legal advice services, which affects the Citizens Advice Bureau. There was also a decision made about the specialist legal advice services, which affected the Southwark Law Centre. That specialist decision could not be called in because officers had decided it was not a key decision. So it wasn't made, it didn't meet the financial threshold, which I think Rebecca mentions in her report. However, My belief is it's fundamentally linked to the generalist service, because when the council was talking about cutting one, they were taking money from another. So Southwark Law Centre have kindly come this evening, and I would ask, Chair, that we do hear from them. I think Jane had already asked you in advance, but that we don't constrain ourselves, because I think the experiences that both the CAB and Southwark Law want to share with us are relevant. I think members would want to hear what they've got to say, and actually it may be that it doesn't strictly mean we can come up with a recommendation as part of the call-in, but we could request that OSC looked into these things in more detail in future. So I would urge you to make sure that nobody is stopped from speaking today because they don't technically fit in a criteria. Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate that was a long point, but hopefully it was clear.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from and what you're saying, but at the end of the day, I believe that what's written in this paper under paragraphs 5, 6 and 7 are in line with the spirit of the constitutional framework in which we operate. And, you know, if people are going to call in items, they have to call them in on a specific basis. The analogy I make is with a disciplinary hearing. Once you've had the first hearing and you go to appeal, you can't reopen the case willy-nilly from start to finish. You have to talk about issues to do with the process in order for the appeal to stand. And similarly, what these decisions have been made, have been taken, and we are at the stage now where we will consider, under the terms of the council's call-in procedure, whether the process or not was correct or not, and whether people have got something to say in that regard. Your call-in specifically says that in relation to complying to legal duties and whether it's out of date. So you will have the ability to move what you wish. I don't really want to go to a vote on this, but I'm quite happily take a vote in order to progress this meeting, because I'm not going to get bogged down in constitutional rigmarole.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that, Chair. I'm just suggesting, well, firstly, I suppose, is could we make sure we do hear from Southwark Law Centre, because they are impacted by the generalist decision. And could we, as a committee, appreciate that the process leading up to this decision is relevant to the decision itself, because we are querying the decision based on the fact that the impact of what's happening now is different to what it was 6 months ago. Well, we need to understand how that assessment 6 months ago was made. So that's my request, I suppose. And I don't want to be difficult at all, because I appreciate this is really difficult to chair like this as well. But my request is to make sure that we could hear from Southwark Law Centre this evening, and that we don't kind of shut things down too early. Let's actually explore the process a bit, because that is, I promise you, that is relevant to the outcome.
I didn't say I was shutting anybody out or closing anybody down. I'm quite happy to hear from them, but I'm quite happy to hear from them on the basis of what I've outlined in terms of what the call over was originally made for. I'm afraid we have to confine ourselves to that particular debate, because that is why we have a call-in procedure. And you know, members may go off piece to a certain extent, but we've yet to hear from the cabinet member. In terms of specialist services and other issues, any individual member of the council, or collectively or outside organisation, can approach cabinet members anytime they wish and make representations direct to them. So there's no exclusion of anybody or any issue or any particular topic that they may want to take. They're at liberty to do that anytime they wish. But
and
this
Scrutiny
overview,
can also do that as well.
Let me finish, please. I'm chairing, and Scrutiny is here to consider these items under the call-in procedure. This is not a Scrutiny Commission. We have not been charged to reinvestigate these issues from top to bottom. What we've been charged with is to call in this item and review it on a specific basis, as outlined. And that's what we're going to do this evening. And that's the right and proper way constitutionally. Because if we start to play willy-nilly with our procedures, then I'm afraid that's not a very liberal thing to do. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We have to be quite clear what our procedures are and to follow those procedures accordingly. And that's what I'm doing this evening. So it's the opportunity now of the Liberal Democrats to talk about their request for a call in on this item, please.
Yeah, before we move on, if I could just say, it is acknowledged that there are some grey areas with the scrutiny calling process. And this meeting has actually been summoned quite quickly in the sense of we have to consider scrutiny callings within a particular time period. Through looking at it, we've realised that that information does need refining. And what you have in front of you is our attempt to guide the process as we think is in the best interest of the council. We will be looking at the scrutiny process going forward, and these issues will be much clearer next time round. Okay, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I appreciate that. And can I also say, because again, I'm not trying to close off any discussion, if there's issues around this evening and the procedure, etc., that members are concerned about or unhappy about, then please feel free to input that into the whip's discussions through the normal channels of the Constitutional Steering Panel, and hopefully those issues can be ironed out and dealt with then. It is not for this body to make its own terms of reference or to reinterpret its own terms of reference. That has been laid down by the Council Assembly, and that is the proper way to proceed with those issues. So without further ado, can we hear from the Liberal Democrats on the call-in, please?
Thank you, Chair. You've explained that very well, and we'll do our very best to get our point across without going too much off-piste, as they say.
Don't worry, I'll keep you on piece. Don't worry.
I know you will. I know you will. Right. I'm just going to say, obviously, I'm hoping that everyone has seen what I said in the actual call-in. So I don't want to go over that because that's quite a big piece of work. But I would like to just summarise, if I could. So the circumstances we find ourselves in today could not have been foreseen when the Legal Advice Services Equalities Impact Assessment was done in November 2019. Even then, it was acknowledged that there was a likelihood that the cuts, and this is actually within the Equalities Impact Assessment, the cuts to the budget may have a disproportionate impact on clients who fall into one or more protected characteristics and those experiencing disadvantage or discrimination. 6 months later, and our residents have been impacted by COVID-19 in a devastating way. For many, their health, housing, employment and benefits have been severely affected. Currently, they cannot go to a cab office and they may not have the resources to make a phone call. When the lockdown is lifted, so many Southwark residents are going to seek impartial advice for matters both small and large. So help and support may go on for months, if not years. This is not the time to limit the advice and support that CAB and the Southwark Law Centre can give. They are needed in their full capacity more than ever. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There's any other, do you want a seconder for that? Or?
Oh, would you like to second it, any of my colleagues or anyone else?
They can remain silent. I'm happy with that.
Never offer me to speak. I'm happy to just add very briefly, unless Humera wants to.
Go for it, Anud.
I hope that we will have a chance to hear properly from the CAB and Southwark Law Centre today about the process that led to the decision about the cut, because actually that has been done poorly, and I think it does merit further investigation, and I'd hope that would be one of the recommendations of this committee this evening. But I also think if the process had been followed properly, then the council would have understood the impact of the cut and the fact that the proposed mitigation of basically transferring the money to Rightfully Yours doesn't work and doesn't help actually in terms of what those services provide. And therefore, now the impact of COVID just makes that impact so much worse. And that is absolutely why we need to look again. So to be honest, we should have looked again anyway. But given what's happening now, we urgently need to look at the assessment. But we can't just repeat the same process, because it's that process that got things so wrong in the first place. So I just hope we can really take the time, not rush this, because this is absolutely the stuff that makes a difference to our most vulnerable residents. It's people's benefit payments, it's them being evicted, it's their immigration status. It is life-changing stuff for the people who are the most desperate in this borough, and we owe them the courtesy of taking the time to really work through that this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'll now call upon the relevant cabinet member, Rebecca Lurie, to respond, please.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Jane and Anoud, for your comments. It was really useful to have them set out in a nice short form. I completely echo all of the comments that you've made about the huge impact that COVID-19 is having on all of our residents. But I think it's worth revisiting some of the details about this specific contract, which we're talking about this evening. So the decision for the reduction in this contract was made in the budget, which was agreed in February 2019. So it wasn't even this year's budget that we're talking about. It was a decision made over a year ago, where the decision made was that we would have a 1920 reduction of £82,500. And as you've rightly said, Anoud, £82,000 was then put into the budget for Rightfully Yours on an annual basis. And subsequently, we would see a cut to the overall budget of £165,000 going forward. During the final year of the contract, Advising Communities, who are one of the other organisations who provided services alongside Citizens Advice, sadly collapsed, and that led to us extending the contract slightly so that we were in a position to be able to make a better decision about what we would do with this contract. And Citizens Advice have picked up that work. So where we are now is that we have a single generalist contract, which is with Citizens Advice. As you both rightly mentioned, there is also a different contract, which is the Specialist Advice Services contract, which is with Southwark Law Centre. I don't dispute at all that they are doing a brilliant job, and that I am sure that they are seeing an increased number of cases given everything that is going on. But that decision is not part of this call-in based on the contract that we're discussing this evening. I'm very happy to have a separate conversation about that contract outside of this, and I know that the Liberal Democrat group separately have raised this issue with Doreen and the legal services team and have followed a process through about that decision-making process. But I'm really keen this evening that we just talk about this generalist services contract as much as we can, because that's the thing that we're able to do. I'm really keen, actually, Anoud, to know a bit more about what part of the process you are concerned about, because obviously this isn't something that happened overnight. As I said, it's based on a decision that happened almost a year and a half ago now, is a process that we have followed in procurement terms, as we do with every other decision that we have taken. I am conscious that the impact quality assessment that we did took place before COVID-19 happened, but this is based on a long-term commitment contract over a number of years that we now have agreed with Citizens Advice. I think it is perfectly acceptable that, given that these services are, we presume, seeing increased numbers of cases coming to them now, that as a council we can look at what other support we can offer both to Citizens Advice and to Southwark Law Centre and to any other organisations who are providing services to our residents, and see how we might be able to offer them further financial support. But I think that we need to consider those two things separately, both in terms of the long-term contract that we have with Citizens Advice and the specific support that we can give organisations such as these around COVID-19. I'm hoping, Ian, that that's a good enough introduction for you.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm going to throw it open to members now for any questions that they may have at this stage, please. I think Helen has a question. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rebecca. I just had a question, just going back to the Equalities Impact Assessment. I know that Anoud mentions about Rightfully Yours, and so part of the strategy essentially was transferring that part of the service over. There was also some mitigation actions that were noted in the Equality Impact Assessment related to older people and disabled people regarding these service hubs, which are due to were noted in the Equalities Impact Assessment as going kind of live in June 2020. Now, is that still on track? I just wasn't sure whether or not, because of COVID-19, whether there'd been any delays in the development of those hubs at all, and whether that was therefore relevant to what we're discussing at the moment.
That's fine. So I might just bring in Jess Leach on that one, because obviously it sits within a different cabinet member's portfolio in terms of those specific service hubs, because they're adult social care specific and older people specific. So Jess, I don't know if you've got an update on those.
Is she there?
She was there earlier.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
So there are so many of us, I'm having difficulty in finding myself to unmute. So the older persons hub is going ahead. It was Hopkins were the successful candidates in delivering that, and they've been working since January to develop the service on that. With the disability hub, there was a delay, and I'm not sure on the outcome.
Hello? Sorry?
Okay, she was just saying that there'd been a delay on the disability service hub, I think.
Oh, right. Okay.
I only mentioned that because obviously that was mentioned as a mitigation measure in the Equalities Impact Assessment, so that also seems relevant to any kind of changes in circumstance that there have been since the report was written.
Okay. I'll move on to Anoud, please.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Rebecca. I do feel encouraged that, you know, you clearly have understood, the great work these guys do, but also that obviously it's even more impacted at the moment. Just you asked me about the process. I think that's much better heard from both of them. Yeah. And like I say, even though the Southwark Law Centre are the specialists, they are impacted by the generalist because, in fact, so one of the confusing things about the process has been, you say it was done 2 years ago, but actually officers were having conversations with them during the whole of 2019 about their budgets. And there was what felt like horse trading about, well, if your service takes this cut, we'll take that cut. So that's why I think it's really important that we hear from both about how that process worked. It certainly wasn't like any procurement process I would want to happen with any sector, let alone the community and voluntary sector. So I think please listen to them. But I would be interested, I suppose my question to you is, what communication do you think was taking place with those organisations and what consultation had? Second question, can you just be really clear how many equality impact assessments happened and when they happened? And third question is, obviously, rightfully yours seem to come in quite late as a way of mitigating. Are you confident that an in-house council service can do the same work as the CAB and the Southwark Law Centre do? So it's 3 questions. I'm happy to repeat them.
So I'm on the impact quality assessment ones, I'm gonna get Jess to come back on it because obviously she's been much closer to it, so she'll be able to go through the specifics of it. On your one about rightfully yours, we had specifically looked at the areas of service that were under the most pressure, and as you said, or I think Jane and you both said in your opening comments, universal credit is one of those services where we're seeing a huge number of people needing extra support, and we believe that the rightfully yours service is able to provide that support. So what we wanted to do was to be able to bring that service back in-house and be able to provide as the council that extra support to people who needed support around specifically universal credit. There are obviously other things that both Citizens Advice and the Southwark Law Centre are specialist in and can provide support in, but we believed as a council we were in a good position to be able to offer that support around universal credit.
So just as a follow-up on that, so you believe that whole 82 grand is just to cover universal credit, so they effectively have to make up the difference with the other things that they gave advice on, and then my understanding is rightfully yours can't do appeals and taking people to tribunals about universal credit, which the other organisations can do. So how does that gap get filled? So I suppose, how does the stuff they were doing as well as universal credit for 82 grand get filled, and how do some of the more legalistic stuff that I don't think does get done by Rightfully Yours get filled. How do you fill the gap, basically, that isn't that universal credit basic application process?
Yeah, of course. So I don't think it is as straightforward as saying we took a chunk of money out and we put it back in, and therefore any organisation has to fill the gap by just removing a service that they were previously providing. We took a decision in February 2019 as part of the budget in extremely difficult circumstances as a council as to where we could make budget savings given the cuts that we were seeing from national government. Those decisions were obviously incredibly difficult, but they were something that was voted on at Council Assembly and agreed as part of the budget in February 2019. There is a paragraph in my report that I circulated to all councillors that sets out the different benchmarking that we have done alongside other boroughs, and we are still in an exceptionally good position in the amount of money that we provide to our advice services. We understand that probably means that some advice services are having to change the way they work and reprioritise some of the things that they are doing, but we still believe that we are able to fund things in the way that we need to for people to be able to provide the advice that they need and for our residents to be able to access the support that they need as well.
Maybe we can hear from CAB about that question.
Sure.
Well. Thank you.
I don't know if Jess, do you want to just come in on the equalities impact bit?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor. Hopefully I remember the question correctly. But what we've been doing is review policies assessment that we did in December.
Sorry, I want a really clear answer to how many equality impact assessments took place and when they happened, and if you can't do it verbally, if you could do it on the chat, please.
Okay, can you not hear me?
The connection's a bit bad, I'm afraid. I don't know if there's anything we can do to improve
I'll type the question in the chat and then hopefully we can get an answer written down.
Okay.
Fine.
Okay, let's move on to Humera, please.
Hi. Rebecca, thank you very much for your additional report. Right at the end, under other considerations, you mentioned something around because of COVID, you might be able to provide some additional support. My question is that as you are bringing the service in-house, that's what my understanding effectively, what you're doing, or parts of the service in-house, wouldn't you do you not have the confidence on the in-house service to be able to just allow the in-house service or to supplement the in-house service, or are you, I'm trying to get under the skin of why you felt you would need to put additional funding in a service that you're removing from the external parties and bringing internally.
Okay, so I think there's a bit of confusion there because that's not what's happening. So the money has already gone into Rightfully Yours. We're not about to do it. That money the 82,000 is already in Rightfully Yours and has been. So we're not talking about putting extra money into Rightfully Yours right now. That's a decision that sits with a different cabinet member and has already been actioned. What I am proposing is that given COVID-19 and the pressures that CAB, Southwark Law Centre and the council are seeing, we need to consider whether there is an alternative source of funding that we need to put into all of those organisations to be able to provide the support that is needed to our residents. In order to be able to do that, we would need to be able to understand whether and in what ways there has been increased pressure on all of those services and the amount of money that would help to be able to mitigate against that, and then see whether we have the financial resources to be able to support those organisations going forward whilst they deal with the effects of COVID-19. Does that answer your question?
Partly, but I think I'd like to also hear from both the Southwark Law Centre and from the Citizens Advice Bureau first, and I may come back afterwards if that's okay, Chair.
We'll see. Jane, next, please.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Rebecca, thank you very much. I appreciate that you're going to monitor the impact of COVID. And can I get a bit more detail about how you feel you'll do that? Because at the moment they have this weird situation where it's all phone calls. Now, I genuinely am not sure if they can see if they have they can see how many calls were dropped, but there's a limited amount of calls you can take. And if they're complex, they're going to be on the phone for hours. So, you know, 4 or 5, 10, 15 people might be trying to ring at the same time. So how can we start checking, although at the moment I think their figures, because they'll come through as only phone calls, might seem very low, but we need to see what it is now. And as the gradual lockdown comes away, we need to see the whole thing from sort of now on. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that we can see the immediate impact. And then even for them, I think it's going to, they won't know day 1, day 5, day 10, which will be the worst. Once people know they're open, because CAB in particular have got 3 points, haven't they? Because they took off the Walworth, didn't they take on the Walworth Road at the suggestion of the council? So they took on a bit of extra expense, and obviously they've got so many people who work. And anyway, sorry, I'll let you speak now.
Don't worry, that's really helpful, Jane, thank you. So I think we're all dealing with a situation where we don't quite know what the numbers of people being impacted are, but there are a range of sources that I think we should be looking at. So there are government statistics around the increase in the number of people, for example, who are already claiming universal credit. There will be, at some point, I imagine, publicly available figures about the number of people being furloughed that we might be able to break down into relevant places, or the number of people who are seeing themselves unemployed. So that's external data that we can use to this process. Alongside that, I'd be really keen that we start a dialogue now with CAB and with the Southwark Law Centre, so we can start from day 1 to understand exactly what they are seeing, and essentially have a kind of open book, for lack of a better phrase, process with them to see what the impact is on them compared to previously, so we can really understand the number of people that they're seeing above and beyond accessing their services, and so that we can understand what that financial gap might look like, so that we can think more carefully about what decisions we might need to make to be able to provide them with extra financial support going forward. But if there are other things you think that would be useful for us to consider, or you have any other ideas about data sources we can use, please do let me know. I'm sure we'd be more than happy to take them into account.
Great, thank you. I have Gavin, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, Rebecca, I think people have covered some of the particulars of kind of impact of the decision already, so I won't go over that. I'm going to concentrate my question on a bit more on process and a bit more on your perspective on this as a member of Cabinet and the use of the call-in as a review of this decision. So my understanding is that the change in situation is what is now prompting this particular call-in, that COVID-19 and the additional pressures that come from COVID-19, which is something that were obviously not foreseen when the decision was in place, that we're currently debating. So as a member of Cabinet, looking across the piece at all the decisions that Cabinet makes, what is the potential impact of calling in a decision that is essentially prompted by the circumstances arising from COVID-19? What are the wider impacts of that to inform the committee about decisions we might be making a little bit later on? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. So I think it's tricky, because when this decision was taken was right at the beginning of kind of COVID-19, us really seeing what the impact was. But I think realistically, what you run the risk of as a committee now is having to call in every single decision that Cabinet make because of COVID-19. And I think, you know, this, as everyone has said, this is unprecedented for us. And there is a lot of work going on across the whole of the Cabinet as to how we can provide mitigation measures to support any decisions that we are making in light of COVID-19. You will have seen the report, obviously, that you looked at Scrutiny that came to Cabinet, and there will be a further report at the next Cabinet meeting, which looks again at how we are providing support in these times. But I think it's tricky, because this is a decision about a long-term contract, and that is one decision. And then there is, I think, a perfectly legitimate separate conversation about how we can best support these organisations during this particular period that we are in, however long it happens to last. If it happens to last the 3 years of the contract, then it lasts that long. If not, I think they need to be seen slightly separately.
So just to comment on your answer, if I may, Chair, just so in your view, the way to kind of deal with some of the issues that have been raised so far are to have those additional meetings and conversations about additional support that might be available, rather than calling in the decision. So not calling in the decision, taking the actions that we're allowed to under the Constitution. Is that correct?
I think that's one way of summing it up, Gavin.
Thank you. Good. Just so we're all clear.
Yes. But we wouldn't want cabinet members dictating our outcomes, would we? So, we got to keep that divide. Okay, thanks for that. Who wants to come back again, please?
Yeah, just to be really clear, I mean, the decision is a cut to the people who advise our residents about finances and things that are particularly so. I think it is right that we're looking at the decision, but also, frankly, if the cabinet is now going ahead and making decisions without considering COVID, then we should be calling it in because they clearly need to. So I would hope that we shouldn't be calling in every decision, because every decision will now consider COVID. So yeah, I think that's a bit of a red herring, to be honest, but that's just my view. I suppose it does link, though, that this call-in was about the equality impact assessment. So it wasn't just that the cut in itself is going to have impact and now the impact's going to be even worse, even though that's important. But it's that the equality impact assessment, which informed the decision to cut, now changes. And that's why I asked about the date, because this is why the process has been so confusing and we really need to unpick it. So you're telling me that this decision to make the cut was made in February 2019. And we can hear from them, but the CAB and Southwark Law Centre were not told that. Clearly, from what Jess has just told us, there was no equality impact assessment done before you made that decision to cut that money. Then, during the year, the CAB were actually asked to take on extra work through advising communities and led to believe that there would be no cut. And then finally, at the end of the year, they're told, oh, here's a cut and here's an equality impact assessment. So the timing of it looks really dodgy to me. Why was the equality impact assessment done nearly a year after the actual decision to make the cut was made? And what I didn't get an answer to my question about what communication was made about the process with those organisations, because certainly, as we'll hear from them, they weren't told about this. And it just seems to me all back to front. And then the rightfully yours thing just came in at the end saying, oh, yeah, don't worry, we're spending some money in-house. So I do think the date of that equality impact assessment is confusing to me. And I suppose that's my question. Why was it done a year after supposedly you made the cut?
I'm glad there was a question in there somewhere. Thank you.
Sure. Right. You're welcome.
So, so I can answer half of that, and then in terms of the communication, I'm going to hand over to Jess, because she will have been the person who was leading on those conversations with the CAB throughout this period. The decision was made in February 2019. You can see that quite clearly in the budget papers, and it was what we all voted on at Council Assembly at the time. There was an existing contract in place at the time, which is why the 1920 figures only removed £82,500 from the contract, because when the contract started, there would only have been half of the financial year left. So the annual saving would then have been £165,000 going forward. So yes, the decision was taken in February 2019 ahead of us reprocuring the contract, which was due to start whenever we were due to start the new contract in autumn last year. However, as you rightly say, advising communities then sadly collapsed as an organisation, and Citizens Advice stepped in to cover that work. And as a result of that, we ended up extending the contract so that we were able to make sure that there was no shortfall and individuals across our borough weren't seeing problems with the service, while we were trying to make sure that the sector was still able to stay afloat. Therefore, we then had the procurement process as it was to be able to enact the cut that had been made as a decision a year and a half before.
So the cut was made before any equality impact assessment?
The decision at the budget in February 2019 was would have been had an equality assessment, as there is with every single budget.
Okay, so there was, so in addition to Jess's point about an equality impact assessment in 2019, there would have been one earlier about the impact of this cut, but we haven't been shown that.
Well, it's publicly available as part of the budget papers from February 2019.
Okay, so Jess should have said, yeah, sorry, I don't know if Jess is trying to come in.
Yeah, sorry. So as part of commentary on the budget in 2000, the decision taken in 2019, we identified that this was an area in which full assessment needed to be made. So our initial assessment of the impact sort of indicated that there was a medium risk and we needed to do the evaluation and a full impact assessment going forward.
Yeah, I'm afraid the connection's not very good. I think out of this and out of the chat room and everything else, I think Jessica needs to write to you directly, Anud, if that's okay, laying it all out, going back to the budget report.
Well, we may also have some more questions once we hear from CAB and Southwark Law Centre about that process. So let's hold off on that.
Yeah. I can chair the meeting, thank you. I was just talking specifically about what Jessica was saying, okay? So, because I can't hear her, and I'm sure other members can't hear her properly, so better we have that in black and white. Helen, you've got the question, please, or comment? Thank you.
No, sorry, it was just a comment, just a recollection. I certainly remember the discussion in OSC during budget scrutiny. It was in the papers as Jessica just outlined and Rebecca outlined. So there was that point of it being medium risk. It was certainly something that I know a number of us were concerned about at the time, and questions were asked at the time through budget scrutiny about mitigation measures, etc.
Okay, thank you for that. If nobody else has got any questions at this stage, I'll bring the Southwark Law Centre in, if that's okay. Are they there?
But I think it might be kind of the order of things might be better if perhaps the CAB spoke first and then we can see points afterwards.
Yep. Okay, Sally. Yep, that's fine. No problem. CAB, are they there, please?
Yes, I'm here. Tim Clark from Citizens Advice Southwark. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good evening. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. I'll try and keep my my comments quite brief. First of all, in terms of the impact of COVID-19, I mean, obviously, as everyone knows, that's had a huge impact on our local residents. It's also had an impact on the voluntary sector in general and us sort of specifically. In terms of the impact on us, it's meant that we've had to, at great speed, move all our services to kind of remote delivery, people working from home, answering the phone, answering requests for help by web chat and by email. And there's pretty much no face-to-face services that are available at the moment, which is not the way that we like to deliver services, but unfortunately it's been forced upon us. In terms of what we're experiencing, we are experiencing higher demand for help, mainly in benefits, specifically universal credit within that, which will be no surprise to anyone, but also for employment related advice, and again, specifically around unfair dismissal and redundancy. Now, we expect that, you know, as the situation continues, we will also experience much higher demand for debt advice as people face longer periods of pressure on their incomes. And we also anticipate housing inquiries to increase as, you know, current protection from eviction measures are lifted in time. We also think that the impact will be felt disproportionately on people sharing protected characteristics. And by that, you know, I'm talking about sort of race, disability, age, because, you know, we in normal times, we serve disproportionately high numbers of people as against the general population in those categories. And just briefly, in terms of some of the mitigations offered around the hubs, the hubs will only provide a very small amount of advice and information. Their remit is quite different from ours. They're set up to provide, a significant range of different services, of which advice and information is one. So, and also the money that is resourcing that, it's not new money. So the cut that we're facing is a cut for advice provision generally. In terms of the impact on us of the cuts, I mean, we're looking at a cut of £130,000 for us. The remainder of the cut will be felt by Southwark Law Centre, and that amounts to about 20% of our core funding from the council. So, at the moment, we're considering how to what extent we can absorb that cut, what impact it will have on our services. So, for example, it has already impacted on how we had planned to deliver the advice services in community languages, which is something that Advising Communities did. We are going to need to be looking at, the number of outreaches where we currently deliver advice, and also, it's likely that we'll have a reduced capacity to deliver our face-to-face drop-ins. Currently, we operate face-to-face drop-ins at our 3 offices, as well as an advice line service, and it's regrettably a cut of that size. It's not possible to absorb that without there being some impact on our services. In terms of the cut themselves, I mean, it's been mentioned, the communication aspect, and I mean, I'm learning new things that I'm hearing for the first time in this meeting. But so far as we knew about the cuts, we were informed for the first time in October of 2019 that there would be a cut. We only found out in February of this year that the Rightfully Yours in-house council service had received additional money. And that's notwithstanding the fact that through the Southwark Legal Advice Network that we run and that's attended by council officers, we've been in regular contact about this commissioning process. We've discussed, the revised timeframes that have happened during the course of this process. We've provided help with the consultation engagement plan that was produced, and we provided feedback on that. We offered a list of agencies to whom it should be circulated, and we assisted with that circulation whilst encouraging people to engage with the consultation. When the consultation was completed, we listened to the evaluation that arose from it of the advice services. And we were told that the consultation findings would inform plans for commissioning. And whilst this was going on, obviously Advising Communities went under, and we were approached, as has been said, to take over their services and their premises at Westmoreland Road as well, which we agreed to do because we thought it was the right thing to do, to be helpful and to make sure vulnerable local people in those areas weren't disadvantaged by the closure of Advising Communities. Now, at no point during any of that were the cuts mentioned, either before or during the consultation. So we felt that for the consultation to be done properly, there ought to have been some mention of the cuts that had already been agreed, so that people responding to the consultation had the full facts at their disposal and could comment accordingly about what they felt about current services and how they felt services should be delivered in the future. And in particular, if the decision was that funding was to be removed from Citizen Advice Southwark and the Law Centre and given instead to the council's in-house team, then, you know, one would have thought that that would have been something that would have been front, left and centre in the consultation document for people to be able to comment on and engage with, but there was no mention of any of that. In terms of the decision to award funding to the in-house team at the expense of the CAB and the Law Centre, I mean, I think what we all do is quite different. Rightfully Yours provides what's known in the trade as an income maximisation service. It will check what a client is entitled to by way of benefits, and then it will help them apply for those benefits. And that is, of course, you know, an important part of the advice process, and we do that on a daily basis as well. But I think we also do a great deal of other things as well. We can provide, you know, wider ranging advice on benefits. So if there are any problems, we can seek to address those through the various appeal processes. We can deliver debt advice as well, so we can liaise with creditors. We can do a whole range of things to mitigate the impact of debt on people. There's housing advice, there's employment advice, there's immigration advice. There's a whole range of things that we do that is not within the remit of the Rightfully Yours team. We know that there's a huge demand for universal credit, advice on universal credit at the moment. One of the things that we do together with the Law Centre is to run what's called the Universal Credit Network. We ran a remote meeting, and the purpose of the network is to provide advice, support and guidance to smaller voluntary and community sector organisations whose service users are affected by universal credit, but who don't have the expertise to provide that advice themselves. I chaired that meeting, and there were 72 participants from about 50 different agencies, including, you know, mutual aid groups that have sprung up recently to help people who are affected by COVID-19. So there is a huge demand out there for advice and information and guidance on universal credit, and it is one that I would say the CAB and the Law Centre are best placed to deal with. So I think that's really what I wanted to say. You know, we are right at the centre of dealing with. We're on the front line. There's huge demand, and it just feels like, you know, the wrong time to be being subjected to a 20% cut, especially if, you know, the idea is that, well, we'll take that away, but, you know, if they can show that they've, you know, that there's a high demand on them because of COVID-19, we'll give them a bit back. I mean, lots of funders are gearing themselves up to help provide extra funding for voluntary sector organisations who are facing high demand as a result of COVID-19 already. It feels like what we're looking at is that, well, you know, there might be some extra money available for us if we can show high demand, but having already been subjected to a very significant cut, which does feel counterintuitive. I mean, we're here to help, and, you know, everyone within our organisations work extremely hard to provide that help in very difficult circumstances. And we, you know, we continue to stand ready. We have the expertise, we have the volunteers. It's just difficult to continue to provide the service that people need in light of this cut. And with the process, you know, concerns that I've outlined, it does feel as though we haven't been at all times. I won't say we've been kept in the dark, but, you know, the communication hasn't always been perhaps ideal, and, you know, especially when none of the consultation documentation referred to, you know, what had apparently already been decided the beginning of last year. It just feels very strange.
Okay, All right, thanks for that, Tim. Appreciate it. I'll go over to Sally now, please. Thank you.
I'll just make a very few brief points and really echo what Tim said. I think very briefly about the process, I think lessons should be learned from that, because it was, we weren't kept informed, despite the fact that, we have, close relations with the officers involved, but, there was no mention. We didn't know about the 2019 decision. We didn't see the equality impact for that. The first that we knew about the cut, as Tim said, was October, and at that point, we were informed that the cut would be completely on the generalist advice service, and then that subsequently evolved into 15% cut across the board, and then eventually settled on a larger cut for the generalist service and a smaller cut for the specialist service. So it just feels like the whole process, I think, and as Anud said, a bit horse trading. It felt a little bit like there was no rational sort of, this is what we found out, this is what the need is, this is what we decided to do. So I think, I'm not going to labour the point, but I do think there's lessons have to be learned from the way the process happened. I think in terms of the impact on the community, and the services, the advice services, legal advice services that the agencies provide. I mean, just to be clear, Southwark Law Centre is a lead agency for the specialist contract, but we subcontract some of that to Migrant Legal Action and to Cambridge House Law Centre. We'll do specific numbers of specialist cases in housing, welfare rights, immigration and employment, so kind of right across the board. And I think what we're seeing is, at the moment, I mean, obviously there's the immediate impact of the pandemic, but I think what the council and ourselves, what we need to work together to look at what the long-term impact's going to be. So, for example, it's really great that the council aren't taking any action around rent arrears at the moment, and the courts are closed. But as people have mentioned, we know that there have been 9,000 new claims just in the 3 job centres across Southwark, London Bridge, Peckham and Kennington. 9,000 new claims for universal credit. The council's own reports on Safe as Houses have highlighted what impact that has on rent arrears. So when the courts reopen, when the council has to start taking action again for the increase in rent arrears, it's going to be a perfect storm. And I think that's the kind of things that we need to kind of like tackle now to start thinking about what we're going to do longer term. So there's benefit issues, and I mean I have great respect for their. It's not called the Right for Yours team anymore, by the way. It's their local support team. I've great respect for colleagues there, but they're not. They don't provide the same service that the independent advice agencies do. They can't take cases to tribunal. They can't help people deal with their rent arrears or those kinds of challenges. So, to say that that's mitigation, actually, it's not really at all. So we need to think about things like that, the increase in benefit issues, the increase in rent arrears. I think people have also mentioned the increase in employment issues. We're already seeing a lot of cases around discrimination in employment. We need to be thinking about how that's going to pan out over the next, not just the next few months, but over the next couple of years, really. The number of rough sleepers, I think it's great. So that's rehoused 176 rough sleepers temporarily in hotels. But what happens to them at the end of June when their lease runs out of the hotels? We need to be able to provide housing and immigration advice, for all those for those people as well. Domestic abuse, we know, like nationally, that kind of how domestic abuse has increased during the COVID-19 crisis. Leading to homelessness, all those issues. I mean, I think I'm kind of repeating things that you all know, so I'm not going to kind of go on anymore. But I think what I would like out of that is, one, a learning from the process, which around the advice services contract, which I don't think was handled properly, and secondly, to kind of a commitment to kind of work together to look about how we're going to work longer term. So it's not just about the next few weeks, it's not the next few months, it's not just about as important as it is getting food and support out to people, is looking at what the impact is going to be on our communities longer term, and working together, recognising the importance of legal and other and generalist advice on that. So that's but I'm happy to.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sally. Sure. I'll bring Rebecca in at this stage. Rebecca, do you want to make any comments at this stage?
Yeah, I'll say something briefly. Thank you both Tim and Sally for your comments. I completely agree with both of your analysis about the issues that we are facing and the increased pressures that individuals right across the borough are seeing. I fully appreciate that there is and there will be much more pressure on debt advice, on housing inquiries, on all of those issues that you've both talked about. But I think it's worth kind of a couple of clarification points, then I'll come to your specific questions as well, Sally. I'm going to bring, I think Stephen Douglas is on the line, and given Jess has a bad connection, he might be able to speak specifically about communications points. But I think there is always an opportunity to learn from how these things happen. And, I'm very happy for us to take on board learnings from this process and make sure that anytime we go through a similar process, we can learn from where things may have gone wrong this time around. It's worth saying that the money that was put into the council's service is not a direct replacement for the money that was taken out of this contract. Over the last 10 years, we've had to take an unbelievably large amount of money out of the council's budget due to national government cuts. We've had to make some really difficult decisions about where we make those budget cuts. In taking that, we did not take this decision lightly when we made it in February 2019, but we have protected as much as we can of the services that we want to provide. I will refer back again to that paragraph where we benchmark against other boroughs, where we have been able to provide a large amount of money for both generalist and specialist legal advice contracts. I think it is also, I think it's then worth saying that a lot of what you both spoke about was about kind of COVID-19 and our response to it. It's worth saying that we have already invested £280,000 to the VCS, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the Southwark Law Centre have had some of that money. I'm not sure whether CAB have off the top of my head already, but that is some immediate funding that we have put into our voluntary and community sector to make sure that we are offering support to residents across the borough. Sally, on your commitment around working together, I'm completely happy to commit to that. I think in the first instance, we need to get together to talk about the immediate support that we might be able to provide in light of COVID-19. I don't think we should badge it about giving back to fill the gap in the contract. It's about us being able to provide that extra support to organisations such as both of yours at this time when there is an increased pressure from residents. But Stephen, I don't know whether you can come in on, or Jess, if your connection is better, around the kind of communication point.
Okay, Stephen.
Sorry, there's terrible echo on the line. Apologies for the communication.
Yeah,
I can't.
Can I? Yeah, sorry, Stephen. Can I just make a general point? If people aren't speaking, can they mute their microphones, please? Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of background chatter, and it's difficult enough trying to hear because of some of the poor connections. So if you could kindly switch off your microphones if you're not speaking, please. Okay, Stephen.
I'm afraid I can't help on the specifics of what was communicated and when, because at that point the service didn't sit in my bit of the council. However, what I can say is, as has been referred to, the decision was made in February 19 as part of the budget report. That obviously went through the usual process. There were equalities analyses undertaken at that point in time, and that was a public decision. So all of those papers were published. There were opportunities to make representations at that point in time. I wasn't part of those ongoing discussions with any of the advice providers, so I can't talk about the specifics of what was communicated and when, I'm afraid. but we can respond to that in writing if Jess's connection is poor. But unfortunately, I wasn't involved at that point in time. All I can say is that was a decision made in public, through the process of Cabinet and Council Assembly.
Okay, thank you. I think Peter had a question or comment.
Thank you, Chair. There's been a lot of information to take in here. I just wanted to kind of reflect amongst members that I am conscious that as this came through, there was a specific concern around the fact that kind of Black African, if I'm reading it right, and I'm sure Rebecca or others will correct me if I'm wrong, that as well as like having a large proportion of disabled clients, Black Africans represented a large number of those accessing the services, and we're aware quite recently that COVID is having a disproportionate impact on Black people. We're also aware that that the disability hub that was to be commissioned, as far as I'm aware from my own commission, that didn't, there were no bidders that met the standards, so that is kind of delayed. So I do see a challenge here from an equalities perspective, is I guess what I'm saying, which is exacerbated by the COVID situation, and that's something that I think does come through based on what's happened recently. And whilst I do accept that one wouldn't want to revisit every last thing, if you see an issue that could be disproportionately affecting vulnerable communities within Southwark, then surely that's the kind of thing you look at.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Peter. I think it's worth saying that I completely agree that the BME community is disproportionately affected by COVID, and there's obviously separate pieces of work being carried out, and that Councillor Okoto is leading on, looking specifically at the impact on our BME communities. I think that the mitigations that we set out in the equalities impact assessment that we carried out for the contract without COVID existing are robust enough that that decision was made, and actually every single that decision was voted on at Council Assembly by all of the members of this scrutiny committee. But I think it is worth us factoring in the impact on the BME community into what further support we can give because of COVID-19 and the future discussions that we want to have about further funding. But I go back to the point that I think there are two different discussions. One is about the existing contract, which is a long-term contract, which is the decision that has been made, and a separate conversation is about how we can further support organisations during this time to make sure that we are not disproportionately affecting certain groups within our community going forward.
Okay, thank you. I've got Humera, please.
Hi, Peter's asked one of my questions, although I would just make the point, Rebecca, that we've seen throughout the COVID crisis that a lot of issues that existed before COVID have really come up to the service. So the inequality comment, actually, irrespective of COVID, I would challenge about the robustness of the equalities impact assessment. My question is slightly different, which is, it's in your opinion, and actually in the opinion of both the CAB and the Southwark Law Centre, is the council really able to provide an equivalent service and an impartial service? Because I do think that's also related to the piece here about if people are unable to receive impartial advice, then is that, when we talk about the process and, well, sorry, I'll stop there. I'll let you answer the question.
Yeah, of course. I think I'll just kind of say it again if I wasn't clear before. The money that went into the council service was not a direct replacement for the money that was taken out of the advice services contract. So it's not a case that we were asking the council to provide the same services that were being provided by either the Southwark Law Centre or by Citizens Advice. That money was specifically allocated to help deal with the increase in universal credit queries that were coming through to the council. And therefore, I don't think that we need to have a comparison as to whether it was an equivalent service or an impartial service, because it's a different service that we're talking about.
Okay, Anoud, please.
Thanks. A question for Rebecca based on what CAB and Southwark Law Centre said, and then one back for them as well. Firstly, I wanted to thank them for giving evidence tonight, because I think generally we've had a very good relationship as a council and those advice services. And, you know, frankly, I know from casework, but also just generally, we all have the same interest at heart, which is helping our residents. So I want to thank them for all they do. And I think it is difficult to come here. You know, they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. So I welcome the kind of honesty they've given about the process. And I hope that the council will actually say this is a really helpful move in terms of learning lessons. And I'm pleased to hear that from Rebecca. Thanks, Chair. I think the process is important because the decision that's made is so dependent on that. And so I wondered a couple of things they said that really concerned me. One was about the consultation that was taking place throughout 2019. And you know, what Rebecca knows about that, given nowhere in that was the cut mentioned until October, from what they've told us, and how on earth then it could have been a fair consultation, and the bit about rightfully yours that wasn't mentioned as well. And the other question, I suppose, is what Rebecca knows about that percentage horse trading that was going on, because that really does trouble me. And the third bit for Rebecca is, you're saying the money that went into rightfully yours wasn't a replacement. So do you then just accept that basically residents get a lesser service? Now, that may be the case because obviously budgets are difficult, but if we're saying that 82 grand isn't replaced, then surely that's the logical consequence of what you're saying. So I just wanted you to clarify that point. And then my question for Tim and Sally is, I suppose, just to understand, because I mean, the evidence given tonight is about the last 2 years, but actually my understanding was you hadn't had any increase. So actually in real terms, things were going down. And 165k actually isn't a huge amount in terms of council budgets, but just would like to understand how much it is in terms of your budgets and the impact, because I accept that we're making the point around things are more impacted by COVID, but you know, the difficulties of kind of applying for extra funding and pots here and there versus actually saying things have changed, therefore we should be able to reverse the cut now. You know, I appreciate that's difficult maybe politically, but surely that would be the outcome that'd be helpful. So it's just understanding the impact of that 165 specifically and the longer term impact of funding over recent years from them. Thank you.
Well, I think one of them mentioned it was a 20% figure anyway. But anyway, Rebecca.
Please. No, but sorry, I was talking about impact in terms of services, not in terms of percentage.
All right, okay. Rebecca.
So I'll come back on your questions, Anoud. So in terms of the consultation, I can't say that I know what was going on in private conversations between officers and between the Southwark Law Centre or with the CAB. You would have to ask the individuals who were involved in those conversations what was said.
Sorry, so do you know anything about that consultation and how they were engaged?
So I know that there was ongoing consultation that happened over a significant period of time that led to the development of the impact equality assessment. What I don't know is the specifics of any conversations that were had between individuals, because I was not party to those conversations, as those took place between officers and between the organisations themselves. And I don't think that it would be normal that a cabinet member would be brought up to speed on every single conversation that was had in those circumstances.
As a result of this evening and what you've heard, would you commit to finding out more about it?
Wait a second, please. She's not under cross-examination. This isn't a courtroom. You've asked questions. Let her answer the questions and don't interrupt her, please. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, there was an obvious follow-up. Just are you concerned to
hear? There is, but you'll get the time to do that, but not now. Let Rebecca respond, please.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that point relates to your comments about horse trading. Equally, I do not know the details of specific conversations that happened between officers and individual organisations, and we have heard that from you. Neither of the organisations mentioned that in their comments, and I do not know what officers' position would be on that. You would have to ask them specifically what conversations were had, and I would repeat my earlier comments in terms of that.
Sorry, Chair, but Sally did mention that.
Anoud, I will happily go away and have conversations outside of this and write to you, as Jess has agreed, in terms of what conversations were had, and we are both happy to commit to doing that. In terms of the idea that nobody knew that this was happening, as we have said on multiple occasions this evening, budget documents are perfectly public, and all of these organisations are involved in budget, budget communications, and actually are some of the most engaged organisations across the borough. It's deeply concerning if organisations are not able to access the information that we are putting out in our budgets publicly and understanding what the impacts of those is, and that's probably something for us to consider in future when it looks at the budget and how we best go about communicating the decisions that have been made. But all of those decisions were public from January 2019, or even earlier, in fact, in December 2019, and then through to January 2019, when it would have been at OSC budget scrutiny. In terms of your question about replacement, this isn't about providing less of a service. There have obviously been some ways in which the council has been able to reduce some of the pressure on the CAB and Southwark Law Centre through taking on some of those extra universal credit cases, but it's not that one was a direct replacement for the other. As I said before, we've had to save 67 pence in every single pound since 2010 at this council. It's been a really difficult set of decisions that we've had to take over a number of years about budget cuts that we have had to make, and we didn't do this lightly. We want to make sure that we're spending every single pound as if it is one of our own, and we have looked at the best way in which we can achieve the savings that we need whilst making sure that we are still providing services for all of our residents.
Okay, thank you. And I think there was a question to both the Southwark Law Centre and CAB there. Would they like to respond to that, please?
Yeah, I think Anud asked about the impact.
Yes.
I think, for the specialist services, it's not a huge amount of money. It's about 36,000. But that represents a full-time post, and that represents around about 60 complex cases that we can't take on. There's been a reduction in that. I'd say with Rightfully Yours, as I said, I have great respect for them, but it has to be understood that once it's not actually taking the pressure away. There is all those people that need help. If they go to an agency like Rightfully Yours, or the local support team as they are one of our main referral sources for welfare rights. So they will refer cases on to us for the specialist support and their representation at tribunals. So that doesn't, there's no kind of easing of pressure on services, because of that. And I think the other point is that it should also be remembered that we took a 15% cut of the contract back in 2016. We haven't had any inflationary rise. At the Law Centre, we're very definite that we want to maintain staff salaries in line with the JNC. We've got a recognition agreement with the Unite, so we keep, we make sure that we're paying cost of living increases and keeping people on the right salary points. So, we've worked out, although, we can say at the moment 36,000, 10% of the specialist contract, a huge amount of money. If you take into account all the years that we haven't had any money for inflation, how that's been eroding our capacity to give legal advice, we worked out it's probably nearer between 100 and 150,000 that we've lost over the last few years. So that's my bit on impact.
Okay, thank you.
And from a CAB perspective, just briefly, that cut of 130,000 represents approximately 10% of our overall funding, slightly less, but still, a very significant amount, especially when, as Sally mentioned, it's taken on top of cuts that we've previously received. And the miracle of it is that as our funding has been core funding has been reducing, the number of people that we're helping has been increasing, which shows the ever increasing demand, coupled with incredible capacity for hard work of our staff and volunteers. But it's not something that can continue indefinitely. We're also independently quality assured and have all the industry kite marks, and complying with all of the regulations and requirements that we need to comply with takes time, and there's a limit to, as I mentioned at the beginning, what can be absorbed. And the point about not closely scrutinising budgets, I mean, we're in weekly, or monthly contact through the Southwark Legal Advice Network and monitoring meetings with council officers. And, I'll repeat, the first we heard of this cut that had been decided in February last year was in October. And after, lengthy discussions had taken place about us taking on liabilities such as a long lease at Westmoreland Road. So that feels a little bit disingenuous.
Okay, thanks for that. I'd like to sort of try and reach a conclusion on this now. What I'd like to suggest, as just to bring it to an end, is I've heard two main points which have come across from the providers. That is really to have a sort of review of the budget process together with the partners, and to draw out some lessons to be learned for the future, and then secondly, to harness working together for a longer term approach, because obviously, irrespective of COVID-19, there's other issues longer term that will need to be confronted, and I mean, Sally and Tim have, I think, illuminated some of those in their contributions. So as two recommendations, I'd certainly like to see those as part of our decision tonight. Are members happy with those two recommendations? No dissent.
Sorry.
I'm looking for dissent rather than agreement.
Sorry, Ian.
Sorry. Hello.
Hello. Sorry,
Yes.
it's Hamera here.
Yes.
I just want to check, because is that just about two recommendations on top of the piece that we need to look at around what we do with this call-in, or do you mean just make some recommendations? I just want to be clear.
Well, I'd be quite happy to see those recommendations go forward by themselves, and then obviously we can decide on the other matter, the call-in. But I'm responding to the debate, and obviously there is an issue there, and
just
I think
checking.
we ought to address those points. Yes, we can determine separately on the call-in itself.
Ian,
Yes.
I'm sorry, slight technical issue. As you were reading out what you were going to say as recommendations, you cut out in the middle of it. Could you say them again? Sorry.
Yeah. No, I think, and obviously, this is to go to the cabinet member to review the budget process with the providers. And then to draw out any lessons to be learned for future processes. And then secondly, to work together on a longer term approach, to deal with longer term implications coming out of COVID-19 and any other issues which we'll have to address. So, I mean, really, they're not instructions. They're just recommendations that we're, to the cabinet member. I'm sure the cabinet member will take those up. We will be obviously considering the call-in separately. Do I have somebody to move a recommendation on the call-in then, please? Of the four options we have.
Oh. Sorry, Chair, can I just have a question before you get to that, which affects the recommendations?
Well, go on then.
Yeah, so just a question to Rebecca, I suppose, about what monitoring of the impact of this cut there was going to be, because we may want a recommendation around that. So I just wanted to understand, I mean, given it's a substantial cut the council was making to advice for our most vulnerable residents, what impact, what monitoring of that impact was there going to be in case that decision needed to be looked at again? The answer may be none, but just curious.
Okay, Rebecca.
I'm not sure of the specifics, to be honest, Anud. It's a kind of multi-year contract, so I would presume that we would monitor it throughout the course of the contract and then reevaluate it before we re-tendered the contract in the future. But I'm very happy to say that we need, I think, in light of COVID, we need to be doing some extra work to see what extra support we need to be giving to all of these organisations, and that's going to require a whole load of other monitoring that we need to think about the best way in which to do it.
Okay. So so we have 4 possible outcomes this evening. So would any member like to move one of them?
Chair.
Yep.
Chair, if I'd like to move that we go for option D, do not refer back to the decision-making body. The reason for that was the kind of process and procedural reasons, which I think have come out quite clearly in the debate this evening, and in the question that I asked of Rebecca earlier. It's quite clear to me that we're talking about a decision, whatever you think of that decision, that was made in February 2019, and the equality impact assessment, as we've heard tonight. I've been looking at it online before this meeting as well. Was published at that time, and so in terms of the remit of this committee, in order to refer back a decision, I think it's quite clear that that process was followed, and therefore the issues that are raised in the call-in don't have the kind of the substance in order to refer it back. The recommendations that you have made, though, which kind of come out of the kind of richer debate that we've had, that's not process driven, I think we'll start to address that, and then hopefully we can get through those discussions. We can start to address some of the issues that have been referred to. But in terms of the formal decision we should make, I think that's right. So you were referring earlier to kind of the divide between scrutiny and cabinet, and just to be absolutely clear, my concern is that we do follow that proper process, and that we use call-in for the reasons that it's supposed to be used, rather than referring back to a decision that happened in February 2019. So I think it's important that it's clear why I was asking those questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Gavin. That's very clear. Thank you. Is that seconded, that proposition, please?
Chair, could I make another recommendation? Sorry, it's Jane, by the way.
Well, hold on. I'm just trying to. Oh, okay. Go on then.
Okay. I was going to go for the one where we do refer it back to the decision maker.
Okay.
For reconsideration, with us registering its concerns about the likely impact of the budget cut and asking for the decision maker to reverse it. I realise that probably goes outside, but that's what we'd really like.
Okay. All right.
Can I also just come in to respond to Gavin's point, Chair, on why?
Well, no. We're coming to a vote.
Oh, sorry, I thought we had debate at these meetings.
No, but we've had the debate. So we've had two propositions. We've had proposition A and we've had proposition B. So we'll move to a vote on A. All those in favour of A, please. Jane. You have to shout out because I can't see everybody.
Jane.
Hamera.
Is this just to be clear to refer? I'm hampered slightly, if you'll excuse me. Is this to be clear? It's to refer back to the decision maker to reverse the cut.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to vote for that, please. Thank you.
Well, it's specifically for reconsideration, but anyway, effectively that. Okay, so anybody else in favour of that? No, so that's 3 votes. And option D, can I see those in favour of option D? You tell me one by one, please. Gavin?
Yes.
So you have to shout out. Yeah, I can't see people, so I have to shout out.
Helen.
Alice.
Leanne.
Jason, you there?
Jason.
Yeah, good. Peter there? It disappeared. What else have we got? Sorry, I've lost my list. That's what I've got. Victoria? Oh no, she's not excluded from this, isn't she? That's why I was getting confused. Okay. So Peter, you there? No?
Sorry, you seem to not be able to hear me. I sent it on the message. I voted for option A.
All right, okay. So that's 4 for A, and myself for D. So that's 1, 2, 3, 6 for D. So that's so we'll be not referring the matter back. Okay, thank you for that, and thank you to the Southwark Law Centre and to CAB for coming along this evening.
Sorry,
wait a minute, let me finish. There are 2 recommendations that that I propose separately that will be going to the cabinet member on that. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair.
Thanks,
Is it
Ian.
possible to suggest another recommendation?
No, we voted now. We voted now, so it's done.
Rebecca said she would be up for doing, and I would have thought that, given what members have heard tonight, they might also be interested in monitoring the impact of this cut. And Rebecca clearly says that was something the council should do. So I just think,
No, it's something the council does do through its normal process of liaison with these organisations.
Chair, can I just add to that? Sorry. I have just voted for option D, but I do think that hearing from the Law Centre and CAB was really important. And I think Peter's point that he made about, given the severity of how COVID is impacting on our most vulnerable communities and the need for advice services, I felt that the process has been followed, which is why I voted for option D. But I do think that there is a moment in time here where a recommendation from us, in light of what we've heard, for the council to review very seriously, specifically, the capacity of the advice services to respond to increased demand for service in light of COVID is really important. And I know that we've put some money into Solace, for example, additional money around domestic violence. So I do think, and I'm sure Rebecca will take that back, and she's already indicated that it's something that they'll be thinking about. But I think it's quite urgent. So I just wanted to flag that.
Okay, all right. Okay, we'll add 2 extra recommendations, one on the monitoring and one on what Helen's just said as well. Okay, so we've got 4 recommendations. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's Alice. I just wanted to agree that, but obviously that also relates to our later discussion on recommendations on the council's response to COVID. So I think we should also just think about how we factor that in there as well in terms of voluntary services.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Well, there's no harm in repeating ourselves, is there?
I'm so sorry, Chair, to be a real pain. It's a nightmare here. Please don't do these meetings at 5 o'clock again. Just really quickly, I think you need to, Benjamin, darling, you need to agree the wording of the recommendations. I don't want to agree something that we don't know. So I'm sorry to be a pain and pedantic. I think we've got 4 points in principle. I think we need to agree as a committee the wording. I've been in committees before where that wasn't done and it causes problems down the line.
Okay, well, I'll get Everton to repeat it back then. Everton?
Yes, one moment, please, Chair.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, we have 4.1 about review of the budget process with the providers and draw out lessons to be learned.
Yes.
Work to get a longer term approach to deal with issues relating to COVID-19. A suggestion from Councillor Al Samar about monitoring the impact of the cut. And a final one, which has just been made by Councillor Dennis. About reviewing the capacity of advice services due to increased demand.
Yes. in the wake of COVID-19. Yeah.
On recommendation 1, it wasn't just the budget process, it was the whole process and the consultation.
Yeah, but it was about money, wasn't it? It was about the budget.
No, it was about the communication. I mean, that was the point that was being made.
Yeah, well, communication's part of the budget process. So.
Yes, but it wasn't just communication around the budget process.
Yeah, look, it's not for us to cross the T's and dot the I's. As long as we make that recommendation, the cabinet member will take it up with the relevant bodies. Okay, so I think that's sufficient. So I'm moving those 4 recommendations. They agree, please? Any dissent?
Agreed.
Right, okay. All right,
sorry, Chair. If Everton can put those in writing and send those to us, then we can just be crystal clear about it, because I think it is important to make sure it covers the scope.
I've had experience before where we didn't get dot the I's and cross the T's, and then there was confusion about what officers had to report.
Ian, Norman's just asked if I can confirm that I'm happy with those recommendations, which I can. They all seem perfectly sensible to me, so I will take those away, plus the other things that I said I would do as well. So we will write to the committee separately.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Rebecca. I appreciate that.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Okay, so let's move on to item 6, please. The scrutiny call in for delivering a climate strategy for Southwark.
Chair, we've been going for 2 hours. Could I ask for a 5-minute break, because I feel like I'm heading down the headache route again when we had OSC on Thursday. Would it be possible just to have a 5-minute break?
Okay, well, let's say we'll come back at 7:05 then. Okay.
Thank you.
Could I ask all members to turn their cameras off and their mics, please?
Will do. What could go wrong, eh?
Thank you.
Oh. I could have a naan sandwich. Oh.
Anyone back?
You're the first back, Councillor Ali. Oh,
And me.
and Councillor Salmon.
I'm here waiting as well.
There's a song about that.
Can you sing it? While we're waiting.
Yeah.
Oscar karaoke. Come on, Richard, then.
I don't want to be putting you all off before the item comes up.
You're the warm-up
Sound like
act,
a good
Richard.
tactic to me.
Wait for the warm-up act.
Council, please note the meeting is now being recorded again.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was going to suggest that maybe Everton should sing it, but
Okay, we all back? Everton, where is he?
yeah, Everton's in.
I'm present, Chair.
Jolly good. Is Victoria in now? Is she back? No, Victoria, you there? No, she'll probably join us at some stage. Right. Okay. Okay, so we've got item 6, which is the call in on delivering a climate strategy for Southwark. I'll follow the same process. I won't. Hope I don't have to repeat all the issues I had to repeat earlier on, but they're all contained in paragraphs 6, 7, and 8. Jane, are you leading off on this one?
I'm going to, Chair.
All right. Okay. Far away, please.
Thank you. So firstly, can I thank Councillor Livingston for providing the paper that came in this afternoon. I've managed to have a quick read through it as well. I'm on the assumption that everybody has read the call in, and in summary, I think the key points around why this has been called in is around the consultation piece, and the when the climate emergency was declared 14 months ago, pretty central to that was around not just consultation, but how education and about how to be able to make the changes that we need to make. We need our residents, we need our businesses, we need people locally to be very much in keeping in step and participating and leading almost the way in making that change, because having been in change management for nearly 20 years, you can't do change to people. They have to want willingly and lead on it for themselves. So when we read the cabinet paper that suggested that as a result of the COVID crisis, consultation was going to be dramatically scaled back, we felt the need to call in. And if I may add, Councillor Livingston, I recognise some of the options that you have put in your paper, and it would be good to hear a bit more from you about the modes of consultation, why you feel that people aren't going to be left out in this story, and what specifically you're going to be doing, not to just, and I just want to be really clear, my experience of Southwark consultation can sometimes be a fait accompli. Here, what do you think of this? Are you all right with this? All right, we'll take it away again. And what would be really good to hear from you is to understand how this would be more of a true consultation, because this is the biggest crisis of our time, you could say. So I'm going to stop there, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I think you've teed up Councillor Livingston very nicely there. Richard, do you want to come in?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think those are important points to acknowledge. I mean, I think for a climate strategy to be worthwhile, it needs to be 3 things. It needs to be, first of all, it needs to be effective. It can't just be window dressing. It has to be really committing the council to do things radically differently to change what we do in terms of carbon production in Southwark to get to that to achieve the aim of being carbon neutral by 2030. So it needs to be effective. It can't just be window dressing. It has to be real actions with real teeth, really committing the council to doing real things. Secondly, and I think this is the point that that Councillor Ali has made very clear, is it needs to be really effectively engaging for those points that she's outlined. We need to be taking the community with us. We need the community's ideas to make this work. And we need to be educating the community and taking them on the journey for those that aren't as fully engaged to make sure that they're making the changes that we know that they need to make. And then finally, you know, it needs to be urgent as well. It needs to be, we need to be treating this as the emergency. And for me, that's a slight challenge I think there is with the call-in, because clearly if this was referred back to Cabinet, then what we would be doing would be kicking the can further on down the road. And I think that would be unfortunate and would not be helpful in terms of progress. And I mean, yeah, there's some truth in Councillor Ali's point about this taking us 14 months to get to this point already. I don't think it would be right for us to be delaying further some of the things that the council would be doing longer. Now, the clear challenge that we've got since the work was done to produce the report for Cabinet has been the COVID emergency and the challenges that's created for us in terms of engagement. And because of that, and because of the need to get that engagement right, hopefully you've got a sense from the paper that was circulated today about how we go about doing that, that we don't lose the pace in terms of getting to a strategy by making sure we still have something, you know, a strategy that's in place in July that commits the councils to clear actions, that is clearly setting out the framework which we're working. But then we're enabling, going on from that, the ability to engage with everybody to ensure that we're feeding in ideas and developing on that as we go through the year. Now, hopefully, yeah, we will be having a process leading up to that, engaging with people. We'll have an online consultation. We've secured a company called Traverse to carry out that work, and I know that Chris Page, the climate director's on this call as well, and can give some more detail if you want about some of the work that we're looking at with Traverse. So we'll get some of that information and some of that consultation beforehand. We'll clearly still be working the partnership steering group, and we'll be working towards re-establishing that. That had 2 meetings before the COVID emergency and before the Cabinet report. We need to get that back up and running. I know I've been talking to some people about how we do that, perhaps in a more focused group to try and do some of that work, but that needs to be done. And of course, the report in itself has a recommendation which I think helps us within all of that as well, in that recommendation number 3 talks about setting up a cross-party members working group, which I think helps members keep on track of all of this to make sure that the report that comes forward in July is fit for purpose and enables us to do that. And yeah, clearly we'll be liaising if this isn't referred back today with both the groups of councillors to put forward nominations for that group to carry that work forward. So that's a very brief run through, but happy to take any more specific questions, Chair.
No, that's great, Richard. Thank you very much. It's in everybody's interest we get on with this tout suite, as you say. So I've got a number of members who want to comment. First of all, Leanne, please.
Great. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Richard. So, yeah, I want to talk about the engagement the Environment Scrutiny Commission's been doing over the last year. So I wanted to run through, so we've heard from community groups and organisations from across the borough and beyond, including Moms for Longs, Dulwich and Herne Hill Safe Routes to School, Living Streets, Fossil Free Southwark, the Zero Emissions Network, Extinction Rebellion, King's College London, London Cycling Campaign, and the list goes on. So we've heard from lots of groups and community members across the borough throughout the year. So using this evidence taken, we drafted our first report in December in response to the climate emergency roadmap. So many groups and members had a chance to feed into that, and that document's actually helped to inform the draft climate emergency strategy. So currently I'm writing up 2 scrutiny reports, one on air quality and the other on the climate emergency roadmap. And I'm hoping to get these signed off in early June. So as this item is about engagement, I want to go back to some of the initial recommendations detailed in our climate roadmap scrutiny report and ask if it is possible to carry out some of these actions online before the climate emergency strategy is signed off. So I think, Richard, you mentioned online consultation, which is great. I just wondered if you consider any of the other things that we recommended in our initial report in December. So potentially setting up a youth council to engage in a structured and representative way with young people. And then online testing of emergency themes of the strategy and a leadership statement from the council about climate emergency. I also wanted to ask, in terms of the climate conference that was planned for March, could this now be combined with the second climate change summit in July? I'm reluctant to suggest delaying the publication of the strategy, but it would be helpful to know if groups and individuals can feed into it once it's been signed off, as we need to make sure we hear from a wide range of residents.
Thank you. Richard, do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's really helpful. I certainly want to thank Leanne and the rest of her commission for the work they put in looking into the roadmap and the work that's been carried out to date on all of this. Just to quickly pick up on those recommendations about certainly in terms of the online testing of the policy and things like that, I think that's certainly something we can move forward with and need to do. Youth Council will need to work out how we do that in the current circumstances, but you're absolutely right. We need to get young people's voices. I know, they've got some of the most passionate, and I think sometimes the most powerful voices in this, and I think we'd be missing out if we weren't engaging with them effectively, and that's something that needs to be very much part of that strategy. Clearly, pre-COVID emergency, we were looking at how we were going to run that into the first phase of the consultation work. So there were going to be 2 phases of the consultation. First, those broad conversations, including the borough conference, to try and engage with people, developing from that ideas and themes, and then testing those further before we get to the July report. We're not going to be able to do it quite in that way, but I think the opportunity that we have after July enables us to do a lot of that work and to make sure that we're building on what comes out of the strategy. And I think it's very much, this is not going to be, in Councillor Ali's word, a fait accompli. I think it'd be absolutely wrong if that's what the strategy was. But what we do need to do is have some clear commitments to action, which can then be revised and refined and amended as we go forward in the latter part of the year, where hopefully some of the restrictions that we've got in terms of face-to-face engagement are lifted as the lockdown sort of unwinds, and I think that gives us a real opportunity to come back to climate conference and have that very broad level of engagement at a later stage as well, because I think that's really critical.
Sorry, I forgot to ask about the steering group. So I know that you set up a steering group just before the pandemic. Do you intend to carry on with that before July? Are you planning any other meetings? Because I think that's really important. You could definitely hold online meetings.
That is definitely right. Yes, we do want to do that, and I know that Chris Page sort of made an indication on those lines to some of the participants in an email that he sent last week to them. And I think, we do need to do that. I mean, clearly at the moment there's a slight officer capacity issue, because the officers in what was a fairly new team anyway have been temporarily reassigned to help out with some of the really key critical work we've had to do with the COVID emergency. They've been leading very much in some of that work in terms of getting shielded members of the community fed, in terms of the council's efforts to do that. But that work is now becoming a bit more mainstreamed, needs that hopefully less of that sort of day-to-day senior officer involvement, and I think that gives us the opportunity to reinvigorate the partnership steering group work online prior to July.
And how do you, and will you be planning to use the 2 million that you've allocated to the climate emergency, the extra 2 million of funding? And is that, have you had any more thoughts about that? Can you use that in terms of to increase capacity within the government?
Yeah, I mean, clearly capacity at the moment is a little bit about who we've got, and obviously recruitment and things isn't easy. We have brought in, as I said, Traverse to help us with the online consultation. We've also secured on a part-time basis a senior officer, Paul Dumphy, who used to work at Camden, so he's helping as well do some of the work that's preparing us for all of this. So we have got some additional resource to help deal with all of this. But obviously there are some challenges about where we can get people from at the current moment, because going out and recruiting in the personnel market at the moment is obviously a challenging thing to do. But I think we can make sure the resources are there to take this forward.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I've got Alice now, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. And Leanne's covered some of my points, and I think we all totally understand the tension between, and I think as your note sets out, how do we make sure we don't lose time on the whole plan coming in and having the right level of consultation. I guess I just wondered, I also feel that yes, we need lots of engagement, but we shouldn't let kind of perfection be enemy of the good. So I did just want to understand if there are a few things that we could do that are a bit more light touch. Yes, totally get the resource point and where people's attention might be, but there are also people at home who might be willing to feed into consultations. And then 2 specific points. What kind of scenario planning have you done around, what July could look like? Because who knows, it might not change that much. I'm certainly sure we're not going to be able to do kind of borough conference style engagement. So what's the assessment you've done and the scenario planning around what the levels of engagement could look like in July? And then my other point was just, we've got consultations, for example, the one that you welcomely just launched yesterday around how we're making our streets more accessible for cycling and walking. So just also understanding, is there an opportunity to also, well, I'm sure that'll be joined up, but to also kind of make points around climate in relation to that and make that as part of the process and consultation around the broader strategy.
Yeah, no, thank you, Alice. I mean, you're absolutely right. Some of these things that we're doing in transport are intrinsically linked to the work that we're doing on the climate emergency. And I think we need to perhaps be even more explicit in how we tie those together. There are obviously things that we're getting on and doing at the moment. In the cabinet meeting which took this report, we agreed 2 very critical things. First of all, the procurement process for energy, which is going to be absolutely fundamental for the council in terms of getting its own energy in line with what we need to do to make us carbon neutral as a local authority. So that piece of work has going forward and is making progress, and that in itself will make a huge contribution to the council's own carbon usage. The other things that we did as well is we also agreed there, as part of the capital programme, a number of measures that will help with a climate emergency, in particular the additional funding that we've put in for school streets, which we know are going to make a big difference, hopefully in terms of getting people out of their cars, encouraging people that go to schools to walk and cycle more, because we know that it's those short journeys which are particularly bad in terms of polluting and creating carbon emissions. And if we can persuade people, particularly for sort of primary schools, to walk their kids to school rather than drive there by making it safer, that will make a big impact. And I think I might need to double check the report, but I think we've obviously got 8 school streets we've already installed either permanently or on a trial basis at the moment. That money will enable us to explode the numbers from 8 to well over 60 and do that over the next 2 years. So that's going to be a significant change, with hopefully a big change coming up in September. Clearly, there may be some challenges about how we engage with schools, but our officers still think that's possible when I last sort of talking to them about it last week. And so hopefully we can move that forward. So I think there are things that we're getting on and doing already. In terms of the scenario planning, I think, clearly we're going to need to adapt whatever we do on what the circumstances are in July, and it may well be that there's some things that we can't do even in July. And I know that the announcement by the Prime Minister on Sunday, as vague as it was suggesting there might be some things that we can't do until September, and even then it'll obviously depend on the rate of recovery. So I think, yeah, we need to have a process, and we are designing a process that's going to be flexible enough to do that. But I do think if we can have larger meetings where people can physically meet, we'd like to do that. So I think sometimes they just create a better discussion, and you can have ideas flowing perhaps more constructively, I think. And obviously not everyone can discuss things online as well, and we need to ensure that we're getting around that. So I think we need to have a process which can do as much as possible online, but also leaves those opportunities for meetings later on in the year, so we can get that quality engagement as well.
Councillor Livingston, can I? Sorry, it might be helpful just to add a couple of things briefly to that, which is, I think what you said is absolutely right. The recommendation that went into the original Cabinet report around us having the flexibility during COVID was very much for that reason, that the things that I think members are mentioning are the things that we've been thinking about. We don't know how COVID's going to pan out, but we want to have the flexibility, I guess, that we can do as much as possible in the best way possible at the time, depending on the situations. But I guess that there's nothing, the intention is absolutely not to reduce the amount of engagement we do. It's about trying to be as flexible as possible to reach as many people, to get the depth as much as possible, and doing that in the most timely way.
Great, good. Thank you for that, Chris. I've got Humera now, please.
Hi, and that kind of leads nicely to the next point, Chris, thank you. So in Appendix 2 from the October Cabinet report, you put a summary of climate activity areas. There's about 22 areas, of which, just me going through with a pen, 9 of them are things that you potentially can crack on with, whereas 13 definitely need some form of consultation. And I hear what you're saying about the fact that, yes, you are trying to be flexible, you're trying to use online tools, but there are still a number of people who are digitally excluded for a variety of reasons, and quite a large chunk of those people are people who still drive cars or have got, you know, different attitudes and approaches. And in the paper that I received at 3:30 this afternoon, I wasn't really clear on how you are going to reach some of those people, because that's not a small number of people. That's still quite a large chunk of people, and bearing in mind that with this COVID crisis, we don't know what might happen. We might end up with a second lockdown. Who knows what's going to happen? And maybe as part of your planning, it'd be the worst. My question to you is, what other things can you be doing to reach the people that can't necessarily be reached by, you know, straight online technologies? And sorry, just humour me for one more second. In the COVID crisis, we've sent out emails across the borough and only reached maybe a third of the population. So even digital isn't necessarily reaching those people. So that's one of my questions. I'll just wait for the answer on that.
Great, fantastic. Who's going to respond to that?
I don't mind. Do you want me to, or do you want to?
Yeah, do you want to have a quick go at that first,
Okay.
Chris? No, yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, I think that's so. When we were trying to think about what we would do in the response to COVID, what we were really concerned about is if we try to stick to the original timetable as set out in the Cabinet report, then the only people we would be able to speak to during the period between March and July would be those who are online, and so we would exclude all of those groups of people that you're talking about. And I think, as we make clear in the report, the intention of this is to be as inclusive as possible. So we want the debate to be moved beyond just those who are already engaged. We want their views, of course, but we want to move beyond that. So we want to reach the people that wouldn't normally engage in this sort of issue. And that includes people who may be digitally excluded, but it also includes all sorts of different groups within the borough. So the whole plan was around going out and reaching them and you know, having pop-up events and face-to-face meetings and all of that sort of thing, which we now obviously can't do. So what our ambition is at the moment is we don't want to reduce the speed at which we're producing the report. We don't want to lose the pace, so we're still trying to produce a report for July. But post-July, when the situation we hope will be different with COVID, that we'll have greater scope to do different types of engagement. So online will obviously be part of that, but we will also, if we can't get to people online, we'll have to look at other routes. We'll have to look at whether we do things in writing. We'll have to look at whether there are groups that are meeting up. We'll have to look at all of those sorts of things. But we can't. You know, we're thinking about those things now, but we can't map out exactly what that will look like because we don't know what the world will look like in July. What we do know is that we don't think it's enough just to do the online, which is why we're pushing the engagement further down into the process so that we can try and find the best ways possible of doing that. And if there are ways we could do it, that members have or others have ideas, we're totally open to doing that, because the ambition is to reach everybody, but it's trying to think imaginatively about how to best do that in the scenario we're in.
Okay, I mean, Richard, did you want to add? Hold on, Richard.
No, I think that pretty much covers it. But I think, yeah, certainly the intention is to get out and to talk to everybody and anybody as much as we can and have that engagement. And I think, yeah, Hamara's point about this can't just be about engaging with the willing. It needs to be about winning hearts and minds. Some of those people who won't necessarily engage digitally is really important. And yeah, that's certainly a commitment that we have going forward to make sure that happens.
Okay, you wanted to come back, Humera?
Yes, just quickly on that. So, Chris, you and I have spoken offline already when you were wearing your hub hat. And one of the points that I'd made was we have access to hundreds and in fact thousands of volunteers right now who are part of mutual aid groups. We're very interconnected in that COVID story, and my question is why wouldn't you use the relationship that 63 councillors, well, assuming all 63 councillors have relationships with mutual aid groups and others right now, so you would actually be able to access thousands of people. Those people are then buying shopping for people and interacting. So there are many ways of interacting now. And I really would strongly encourage that to be the case. And I would add to that just the point about pace. So this was the one other quick question, Chair, is that we're not arguing about the whole report. We're just arguing about the consultation piece. I don't think it's going to hold your timeline up, because you were able to respond to this fairly quickly today in trying to put alternative proposals together really quickly on how you can get to the people who are hard to reach in the current timescales. I think it's absolutely possible. And perhaps something that might help, you mentioned a cross-party steering group, but we are awaiting invitation to that. Perhaps that could formulate very quickly, and then we can provide you with a whole ton of ideas on how you can get to people very, very quickly. So,
I'm sure Richard will convene it tomorrow. I'm sure it's
well, yeah. I mean, clearly, as I said, yeah, we can't constitutionally do it until the report is cleared. So the way to enable us to have that steering group is for this not to be referred back, and then we can get that up and running quickly. And then obviously there can be that conversation with the group whips about who should be the members from each group on that.
But sorry, I think the point I'm making is
your point about can we be more imaginative about how we engage, and I think your point about mutual aid groups is an interesting one. I think that's certainly one we can we need to be looking at very actively, because I think, yeah, it's a good idea, and we need to look at the practicalities of that, and I'll pick that up with Chris offline to see how we can do that, because I think it's a really interesting suggestion.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify my point, I appreciate you want the report released now. I'm saying it wouldn't take you an hour to tweak that report and resubmit it, with some alternative proposals. So,
well, it would need to go back to Cabinet and get approved by Cabinet, which, in terms of current timescales, unlikely to happen. Well, to have that report agreed, I think now probably until July, and so therefore we're getting an extra 2 months or so delay in terms of getting to the point of having a strategy. So I think it would create a delay, I'm afraid.
Cabinet meets a lot more often than that. Anyway, I don't agree that it would have to wait till July to go back again if we ask for it to be turned around today.
Well, I think Richard's listening to the discussion, and I think he'll take on board the points you made without it being a formal decision, which would need ratification by the Cabinet. But anyway, Anud, you're next, please.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Richard and Chris. couple of questions. The first is quite a lot of the papers talk about a draft climate change strategy. Does that actually exist somewhere that we can see? Because the draft strategy wasn't included in the papers. So that's my first question. The second question is I'm very confused about whether air pollution is included in what we're talking about or not, because I've heard different conflicting views about whether it's just carbon reduction targets. So anyway, if you could just confirm that air pollution is included in this climate change strategy. And then the third, which is keeping to the rules about very much the grounds of the call-in, were around consultation. I feel reassured that both Chris and Richard have said there is no plan to reduce consultation. I think from what I understand, you're saying there's no plan to reduce it. We're just not doing it between now and July. There's a nod there. So, and that just seems to me a real missed opportunity, partly because the earlier you get it, the more it can shape. But also now is actually in some ways a good time to be consulting with people. Lots of people have more time than usual and are furloughed or whatever, and actually might have some time to think about these things as opposed to our usual busy lives. But also actually COVID itself is showing us ways of reducing carbon, and everyone's commenting on reduced air pollution and so on. And so actually now would be quite a good time to engage with people, given we can see around us the benefits. So I just, like I say, I'm reassured you're saying no reduction, but to me, if you're saying no consultation over the next couple of months, that is basically a reduction, because you will be further along in your thinking, and you may not be able to do what you wanted, but you could do some. And as Ian says, Richard is clearly listening tonight, and I think that's helpful. I think it would be even more helpful if OSC were able to kind of put some stuff down on paper, and hopefully we'll be allowed to agree what it says. But I would have thought, some of the points Leanne and Alice have made around, youth council, stuff like that. So I would have thought, hopefully the outcome of this evening is to push back and say, wait a minute, you can be doing consultation between now and July. Here's some ideas for what you could be doing. And as Humera says, that shouldn't need to take hours and hours, but actually now might be a really good time to do some of that additional consultation. So the third one was a sort of plea rather than a question, but if you could answer the first two questions as well, that'd be really helpful.
Okay, well, I probably ought to clarify the third, because I think we clearly will be having some consultation before July. I think the point was it's not as, because given the very restraints of the lockdown period, is it by, it just logistically, it can't be as thorough as we would have liked to have done before the lockdown started, and therefore we know we need to carry on the consultation post July, and that's very much part of our thinking. So just to reiterate, we'll have online consultation before the July report, and through the portal that's being developed by Traverse. We will also have the partnership steering group being reset up and working. Clearly, we've talked about the members group as well. I think that will enable us to think about, are there other things that we could do to consult prior to the July report? So I think there's opportunities to do that. So I would like to reassure Councillor Al-Samarrai that this is not the case that we're sort of kicking all the consultation back post July. We do want to carry out consultation before that. It's just that we recognise we're going to need to carry it on, and probably in a bigger way than was originally thought, past the July deadline to develop that work and carry that forward.
Can I just have a follow up on that, Chair, either now or when Richard's answered the other two?
Okay, on the other two, in terms of the draft strategy, I think our proposal in terms of the original timeline for all of this was to do broad engagement for the first sort of couple of months, in a pre-lockdown world. So prior to the lockdown being announced and that reshaping our thinking, proposals have been we were going to have broad conversations for 2 months, that informing a draft strategy, using then that draft strategy to have further, more detailed consultation before we got to July report. Now, given that the stages are having to be revised because of where we are, that process is going to be slightly different. And so, I mean, the draft strategy as it is doesn't yet exist, although obviously there's early workings on that and work has been done to do that, but there isn't a live document on that at the moment. But I think the process that we're talking about in terms of setting it up, there is you'll see a framework that's been put as part of the draft structure for the report, and you'll see that within the papers. But I wouldn't call that the strategy in itself. But I think that and I think we're obviously tweaking the process given the lockdown circumstances, and so I think what we're now proposing to do, have those discussions online and other ways to get to a strategy that we gets agreed by the July Cabinet, and then have further work that carries on after we have that strategy in place to consult and build upon that strategy later on in the year. And your other point in terms of air pollution, I think there's clearly, whilst air pollution and carbon are not the same thing, there clearly is a big link between the two. And I think the likelihood is that lots of things that we need to do to address one are going to impact on the other. And so we do need to be looking at the things in tandem. Clearly, if we're and as you say, I think one of the nice things about lockdown, not that there are many, is how much better air quality has got in the borough. And I think that does give us an opportunity to reset people's thinking about how they get about how carbon's produced, and do people want to go back to the levels of poor air quality that we had pre-lockdown, or do we want people to think about the world in a different way? And that does give us some big some really positive implications as well about how we reduce carbon in doing that.
Okay, thanks, Richard. I've got
Sorry,
Jeremy
Chair,
Lee.
can I have my
Wait,
follow-up?
No. I've got other people in the queue. Wait your turn.
It's funny, you allowed
Wait
Labour
your
councillors
turn,
quite a few
please.
follow-ups.
No, I did not. I've got Jeremy Leach now. Jeremy, do you just want to introduce yourself for the wider public so they know who you are and what you are? Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chair. My name is Jeremy Leach. I'm a co-opted member of the Environment Scrutiny Commission. Richard, thanks ever so much for this. I'm really sorry I haven't seen the paper that was submitted this afternoon, but I think I share with everybody else's view that there shouldn't be a delay in producing the draft budget. The draft strategy in July sounds like a good date to hit. I just want to say that, and it's been understandable because of what's happened with coronavirus. There's tremendous disappointment amongst the stakeholder groups that the engagement that was originally envisaged hasn't been able to happen. And I think that in the light of that, I just think we ought to maximise the opportunity that exists between now and the time that the strategy is being developed. And I'd just like to, and I perfectly understand the points of a broad engagement involving people who are not sort of necessarily able to get involved in digital stuff. I do. Just before then, I just want to propose that those who have engaged up to now, such as the groups involved in the partnership steering group, I think there should be a potentially more intensive use of that group. And I'd like to propose something around the headings, let's say 3 or 4 headings. There could be online, workshops, either with yourselves and Chris, like there was in the partnership steering group, some online workshops to really have a look at the content of policy around those headings. My final point is I think that groups like Extinction Rebellion have really worked hard to work up some strategies and potentially almost parallel strategies. And I would really suggest reaching out to them. So this is Southwark Extinction Rebellion, sorry. I really would reach out to them and ask them to share, not just in terms of them giving you the work they've done, but really for yourselves and Traverse to engage with that. I do think they've got a lot of work that could inform the strategy, and it could be stronger making use of the work, the amazing work I think they've done. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. I think those are constructive comments. I have to admit, I share your disappointment and frustration. That's not because I think anybody's to blame, but obviously the circumstances where we've got to, we'd built up quite, developed thinking about how we're going to take the process forward, and it's been a challenge, but we do need to move forward. And I don't think we, as a world, can afford to lose pace on this work. So I think it is right that we take things forward. I think you've made some really helpful suggestions there. Again, I think those are things for me to take up with Chris about how we can do that. We do need to work with that partnership working group. I quite like your idea about themes and how we do things online. So I would love us to do that. I also need to talk to Chris about the practicalities about how we do that. But I think those are really helpful suggestions.
Could I mean, yeah, I mean, Councillor Livingston and I can discuss this outside the meeting, but to reiterate, yes, I completely agree, Jeremy. I think I too am disappointed that we are where we are, but we are. In terms of Councillor Livingston's mentioned already, we are intending to do online consultation between now and July, and we have a hub that's developed, and the questions of that were discussed at the Partnership Steering Group, which are around the different themes that are in the report, and giving people an opportunity to input into that. But I think in addition to that, what I'm hearing I think would be valuable is that you're saying XR and others have got some of that detailed work, so we need to reach out to those, and I'm very happy to do that outside of this meeting, to get in touch with them and to see what they can do particularly. But what we're going to do with the online stuff is I mean, I'm talking to our communications colleagues at the moment about how we can use the council's communications to push this out, because the council's communications are currently prioritising COVID messaging, and I think that's right and appropriate. So what we don't want to do is to dilute that. We've got to make sure this stuff fits in with it, and you know, as others have said, it does. I mean, climate change and a green recovery very much fits in with this. But I'm having those conversations at the moment with communications colleagues. But regardless of that, in terms of general public communications, we are intending to send out to all the people in the Partnership Steering Group and others the online hub as soon as it's available in the next few days, and we would then encourage them to send that out and the link out to their users, to their members, and to others, to try and get those that are interested, engaged, and have something to add to get them to input.
Great, thank you. Everton, can I just check, are there any outside groups with us that want to speak on this report at all?
Chair, I did have the name of a lady called Celeste. I'm not sure if she's actually listening to the meeting.
Okay, is Celeste with us?
And she was from Mums for Lungs.
Mums for Lungs, yeah. Or is there anybody else from Mums for Lungs with us? No. Okay. All right then. No problem. Mary, you said you had a recommendation?
I think Anoud had a follow-up first. So could I let Anoud go first, and then, because that might inform what I have to say.
Well, I should hope it will.
Can I also say my iPad is dying and it is plugged in, but it doesn't seem to be charging fast enough. It's not going up as fast as it's going down. So if I go, apologies. It's my technology. I just wanted a couple of follow-ups, if that's okay. So the first, sorry, can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Ian. The first one is, just to be really clear, Richard said that we declared a climate emergency over 12 months ago, and yet there still isn't even a draft. I just want to be really clear, I haven't missed something there. The second point, reassured about the air pollution. I think it's exactly why we need to do consultation, because that's certainly always the biggest issue people raise with me on the doorsteps when it comes to sort of environmental green issues. So really, really want to push that being part of the consultation. And I think we're fudging a bit whether there is a reduction in consultation or not. I think there are, as other members have suggested tonight, definitely ways to be more creative. I mean, Jeremy talked about Extinction Rebellion, just the way they consult with their members. They do a lot online and is really clever and creative. So I think Humera's point about mutual aid groups, you know, we've got TRAs, we've got faith groups, we've got community council lists. We've got lots of ways of engaging with people who already exist, and those links to us may help us get into people who we don't, like the TRAs or the mutual aid groups. So I do think we should push back. I don't think, nobody wants to delay things, but I really, really feel strongly that we shouldn't kind of use COVID as a, you know, I know it's really difficult for everyone to manage, but it shouldn't be a reason or a kind of get out of just having to work harder, frankly.
Thank you. I mean, certainly we're not intending to make COVID an excuse for not working harder. I think, you know, what it does is it creates some genuine challenges that we need to try and find different solutions to. I do actually think, you know, bizarrely, that one of the things that it does do, which helps us, is it gives a greater sense of what responding an emergency actually feels like and looks like, and it shows, you know, the experience that we've had in terms of how things have changed in the nation over the last 3 months, I think have shown us actually, what responding to an emergency looks like and how you can really change things significantly given the will to do it. And I think that's something we need to build on and capitalise on. In terms of your comments about the timing of it, I think, it goes back to my point that there's a tension here between how we engage as effectively as possible, how we have a strategy that's as effective as possible, and how it's urgent as possible. And all of those three things are in tension. And yes, I think we, as much as we'd like to have a strategy that's bolted down and in place already and to have got further on down the line, we do need to make sure it's effective as well. And we do need to make sure.
Do we know why it's taken so long, though? Because COVID's only been the last couple of months, but it's still taken over 12 months to get to a draft. I just don't. I assumed there was one already until this call.
Well, no. Well, I mean, you'll see in the report, there's certainly a framework which helps put together that strategy. That's in place. There has been lots of engagement work that's been taking place.
Sorry to push. You say you wish we were further along, and we're not. What is it that's delayed things? What's gone wrong before COVID that we can learn from?
Well, as I said, I think the level of engagement that it's been very clear that we need to have, and getting that right is something that takes time, and to put together those structures. I think we've obviously got to a place now where we've got money commitments and staff commitments to do this work, which wasn't there back in March, and unfortunately some of those things take time to get into place. But those things are there now and enable us to move forward. So I think there has been good progress. I think everybody obviously wants things to move forward as quickly as possible, but I think given the challenges and everything else, I think we're making good progress on this. But I think your points about consultation are well made, and we'll reflect on those as we move forward.
Okay. I wonder if there is a recommendation about the emergency definition and how we could push on that. But yeah, appreciate that. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, Humera, then you want to come back with a recommendation?
Yeah, so I'm very conscious of the fact that this is the second call-in that I've been involved in. So there was one last year where, because of time, we kind of got bounced into saying let the cabinet report go through, and at the same time there is something that suggests, and I've heard what Chris and what Richard have had to say. There's something that suggests it's still going to take some time until July. So the majority of that report is absolutely fine, and we'd want it to go through as quickly as possible. There's an element of it that we're still not comfortable with. My compromise or recommendation, if there's a way to see this through, is if you let that report go through, how quickly, and I mean quickly, could you follow up with updating the consultation strategy part of it and getting that through cabinet as quickly as possible, so hot on the heels of it, so you could still maintain your July timescales, you could still get some of the other bits and pieces that you wanted through, that you want to get cracking with, but at the same time we're saying that the conversation that was in that report about consultation wasn't strong enough, if you're saying that we're in a bit of a movable feast in these times, how quickly could you just put a follow-up addendum paper that could then supersede those components of the current report? Or, as Anoud suggests, call an emergency cabinet meeting to kind of get that through as well.
Richard?
Yeah, no, I think, well, as I say, I don't think it's the fact that we thought the consultation that we originally set up wasn't good enough. I think we thought it was a very good process we're putting together. What's been a challenge has been the impact that the lockdown has had on enabling us to take that forward. That's not to say that what was put in the original report and those original plans were deficient in any way. What has changed has been the circumstances in which we're working. I mean, I think I might want to refer back to Chris, because he's the person who has to do the hard work in terms of putting things together. I think if people want follow-up information on how we're taking forward the consultation and building on the paper that Chris circulated earlier today, we can do something like that for OSC, and if that's helpful, happy to do that. I don't think it necessarily needs to go back to cabinet, because I think the cabinet decision probably covers all of those things, but it's obviously also something that the the members group that we would be establishing under recommendation 3 could take forward as part of its work in any case to enable us to get there.
We can, yes, I mean, I agree, Councillor. We can certainly provide more information to the committee about what engagement could look like moving forward. The only caveat I would have with that is we would be operating in the world as we see it today with COVID as it is today, so we won't know beyond that. Just to be clear on, if the committee were minded to refer this back to Cabinet, so wanted Cabinet to take a decision on a different type of engagement, it would mean we couldn't implement any of the anything that's in the report. So actually, in terms of if I mean, I don't quite know the timescales, but if it went to June Cabinet would then be agreeing a consultation process between June and July Cabinet, which is about 3 or 4 weeks. So from that point of view, what we'd probably then have to do is move the date of the July decision back to an autumn Cabinet. So we could then do an engagement process from kind of June onwards, but it would mean we'd have to move the actual, in order for that engagement to meaningfully influence the report, we'd then have to push the report back beyond the autumn.
Apologies, my screen just completely froze, so I have just missed most of what you just said. I'm sorry, Chris. Is there a quick summary?
Well, it was brilliant, and I'm sorry. So basically saying that yes, we can certainly give more information to the committee on kind of what engagement could look like. I'm saying that if the committee is minded to refer back to Cabinet, then my understanding is that we couldn't implement any of the engagement now until that decision's taken. If that engagement then set out what engagement we were going to do to influence the July report, we would only have about 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks between the June and the July Cabinet in which to do that engagement. So it would almost be meaningless. You'd have to then push the July report back into the autumn if you wanted to do that. I mean, yes, it's obviously for the committee to decide.
I don't think that's what I'm saying. Sorry, apology. Sorry, I don't think that's what I'm saying. I think what I'm suggesting is if today we just said, fine, let this report go, but you've got and I disagree with you, Richard, that in the Cabinet report that we would say let go, I don't think is strong enough around your consultation piece. And I'm not saying it's about satisfying OSC members. I'm saying, can you get that back to Cabinet as an addendum to come later, and then that gets its own approval and gets bolted onto this particular report, so that the rest of the report, I mean, I'm just trying to find creative ways of not stopping the rest of this report going through, but I'm very, very concerned about consultation, and I'm not happy otherwise.
What we could certainly do is when we'll bring the July, the report coming in July will be a strategy. It'll say what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, but it'll be subject to proper public consultation. What we would do as part of that report is set out the sort of subsequent engagement that needs to take place. We will set out the mechanism we can set out in that July report a mechanism by which we would do that engagement sort of over the summer and beyond. And that would then be subject to scrutiny and so on. So if you were unhappy with that at that point, you'd have an opportunity to sort of challenge that.
You will have lost 2 months. I mean, you want to be engaging people now, surely.
Can I ask for an answer to my question, which is it possible to have an emergency Cabinet meeting?
Hold on. We're going round in circles here. And, we could debate this all night till the cows come home. And
sorry, Chair, can I have an answer to my question?
Wait a second. I'm talking. We're trying to find a way forward here. There are constraints in terms of a timetable. We all want to get on with this consultation as quickly as possible. And you've heard this evening, the quickest way to do that is not to refer back this report. Richard has quite clearly taken on board the suggestions that have been made in terms of extending that consultation and being more inclusive as part of that consultation process. And Chris has already indicated they're going to work a lot earlier on that. So I think, there's agreement there. People have listened to what you've got to say, and I don't think, we need to really thrash this out much longer. I will allow you one more question, and then I'm going to go to a vote.
Sorry, Chair, it's just I'm entitled to ask questions of the constitutional officers if we're trying to work out a process. I don't think that's unreasonable to ask. I'm asking what the process around calling an emergency Cabinet meeting is, because if what we're being told is the problem is it will take too long to get to the next one, we're talking about a climate emergency. Clearly, members of both parties think the consultation isn't adequate that's being proposed, and therefore it seems right that I can ask whether it's possible to call an emergency Cabinet meeting. Whether we think that's a good way or not it's just a question of fact to the
Well,
constitutional
that's
team.
a matter for the cabinet. That's not a matter for us. We've got
Well,
no jurisdiction
oh, sorry, I don't know the answer. Sorry, I have no idea. But
well,
if,
you could always email him. I'm sure he'll tell you.
well, no, I'm
That's
sorry,
not a matter for
Chair.
the committee. That's not a matter
I
for
want
the
to
committee.
ask a question of the constitutional officer, who I assume is Everton, about what the process around an emergency cabinet member would, a emergency cabinet meeting would be. Is it possible for them to happen at all? And if so, what is the process about how they happen? Because, for example, if it is one cabinet member can ask the chair, then we could be asking Richard to do that. So I'm just trying to understand the process, and I'm really sorry I don't know the intricacies of the constitution, but that's why we have officers here at this committee meeting to ask those questions of. So
And you
please
want
could
to call
somebody
extra
tell
meetings
me
at this time with COVID-19? That's very productive.
about
Okay,
the climate emergency. If we truly believe we are in a climate emergency,
Thank you.
then we
Let's hear from the
absolutely.
constitutional officer.
Thank you,
You've asked
Chair.
your question. Norman or Everton, please.
It is possible for a meeting of the cabinet to be arranged at short notice.
And what is the process, please?
Yeah, exactly. Who would initiate that? The leader of the council?
The chair of cabinet can agree when to hold a cabinet meeting. So an approach would be made to the leader of the council to hold a cabinet meeting for the circumstances given, and then it will be for the leader of the council to decide when that cabinet meeting is. I'm actually just looking at the constitution in terms of the timescales in relation to referring back a decision and how quickly it needs to be considered. If you could just give us a moment so I can just have a proper look at that, and then I will come back to you, Chair.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Chair. I do think it's important, if the reason we're not referring back is simply about timing, we need to understand this point.
I mean, the next cabinet, I think, is on the 16th of June. So I think it'd probably be quite hard to fit in an emergency cabinet meeting before then. And I think if you're waiting until the 16th of June, it speaks to Chris Page's point that that doesn't leave you long between the 16th of June, given that any decision taken there would obviously also be subject to a call-in process and the timescales after that before you get to the July cabinet. So I think the point that's been made about timing-wise, what you'd be doing by referring back is effectively pushing back any cabinet discussion of the strategy until the autumn. As you know, if you look at the timing of it, I think is absolutely right.
Okay, well, let's wait to hear from Everton.
While that's happening, I wondered, Ian, whether it is just worth pursuing Humera's compromise point in a slightly different way, which is, even if we couldn't formally make it an addendum, whether, you know, Richard and Chris could send a document to OSC in the next week, if we're worried about timing, suggesting a, you know, additional consultation that would happen, and make that a kind of formal report back to OSC, so it's got more weight than just they've agreed to things tonight, but it doesn't have needing to go all the way back to cabinet. I think that might be what Humera was sort of getting about an addendum idea, but just a formal document about what additional consultation should take place as a result of this call-in.
Okay, Chair, I have an answer now.
Okay.
If referred back to the decision maker, and the decision maker is a body such as a cabinet, then it should wait until the next scheduled meeting, unless the monitoring officer determines that the matter cannot wait, in which case it will be considered within 15 clear working days. So the next scheduled meeting, unless considered urgent, and then it needs to be considered within 15 working days. 15 clear working days, sorry, Chair.
So in theory, the monitoring officer could say it's urgent, we need a cabinet meeting next week.
In consultation with the relevant chief officer.
Yeah.
OSC Procedure Rule 19.4, Chair.
I mean, it's whether we think the climate emergency is a climate emergency or not.
Well, that's not the issue. We all agree with that. It's just that we work within a framework, as I indicated before, and obviously there are cabinet meetings coming up, and we want to get this through as quickly as possible, which is what Richard has indicated as well.
But the Constitution allows us to refer it back and for it to be dealt with urgently. So I think, yeah, that point we could get round it if the committee was minded to refer it back and ask the monitoring officer for that meeting to take place urgently. I mean, I'm not saying that. Well, I am saying that's what I think should happen. I'm not saying that's what everyone else. I mean, shall I put that as a proposal? Would that be helpful?
If you wish, yeah.
Okay. I assume Humera is Jane back. Humera, I can't.
I'm here. Yeah, I'm here.
Cool. Okay, so my proposal is we refer it back to the decision maker because we think that a reduction in consultation between now and July isn't appropriate, and that we would ask the cabinet member to come up with a more creative way of looking at consultation between now and July, so we don't see any reduction. We note the comments about timing, and therefore we would ask the monitoring officer to take the referral back as urgent, and for that cabinet meeting to take place within 5 work, the minimum number of working days, not the maximum.
Okay. So we got that proposal. I presume the 3 Liberal members are in favour of it. So
well, we don't vote along party political lines in these meetings, Ian.
You just mentioned their name, so
I was checking Jane was back.
Yeah. No, I presume they're in support. Are they? They're not disagreeing with it.
I don't know.
We
leading
agree.
Liberals.
You're all so agreeable. Yes. Okay. So what about the Labour members then? So. Well, I'll go through them one by one. Peter?
Sorry,
not in. I'm not sure how you want me to state it, but I'm not in favour of that recommendation.
Thank you. Helen?
I'm not in favour of referring back, but I am in favour of the compromise idea that was put forward a moment ago.
Which is the sort of report on the additional consultation.
Yeah, and essentially a note that would come back to OSC outlining the ways in which consultation could be increased between now and July, but with the view of still publishing the draft strategy in July.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Gavin?
Yeah, the same as Helen's just set out, Ian. I think that position of having a paper come back with a bit more information direct to us would be good, but I'm not in favour of referring back.
Thank you. Alice?
Yeah, I'm the same as Gavin and Helen. I'd also just like clarification on, which might be an additional point to that, is can we have a clear time frame for establishing the members cross-party working group, or is that also something that has to go through cabinet? Because if we can include that with a note coming back with a clear, with a commitment that the cross-party working group will be set up in, I don't know, the next 2 weeks, that might not be feasible, but I'd like something around that as well if it doesn't have to go through cabinet. But I don't agree with referring back.
Okay, thank you. Jason?
Yes, I'd like to agree with Helen, Gavin and Alice on this. I don't agree with the recommendation proposed by Anud, but what I do think would be helpful is a paper that came back to OSC.
Okay. Victoria?
Hi. I don't agree with the Liberal Democrats' proposal, but I do agree that a report should come back to us as soon as possible to us so we can actually review that correctly. And then I agree with Alice that